Rain hammered the stained glass like bullets trying to break through. Evelyn Hart, 23, drowning in a wedding dress that cost more than her father's entire medical bill, walked down that aisle knowing exactly what she was: merchandise. Payment, a bargaining chip wrapped in white silk and terror. The man waiting at the altar wasn't a groom, he was a collector. Damien Moretti, 40 years old, Mafia royalty. The kind of dangerous that made senators sweat and rivals disappear into the Hudson River wearing concrete shoes. She'd never met him before tonight. And 3 hours ago, in a bathroom stall, she'd told her best friend there was no way in hell a man twice her age could ever touch her heart, or anything else. Unfortunately, Damien's security had wired the entire venue. He heard every word. Now he stood there in his $1,000 tuxedo, watching her approach with eyes that promised consequences she couldn't even imagine. If you want to see how a forced marriage to New York's most dangerous man turns into an obsession, neither of them can survive. Stay until the end. And drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The chapel smelled like imported roses and old money, the kind of scent that made Evelyn's stomach turn because it reminded her of funerals. Expensive ones. The kind her family could never afford. Not anymore. Not since her father's casino empire collapsed under the weight of debts he'd borrowed from people who didn't accept apologies as payment. She focused on breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, one foot in front of the other. The dress weighed 1,000 pounds. Vera Wang, her mother had whispered earlier while zipping her up with shaking hands. As if the designer label somehow made this less of a transaction. As if silk and lace could disguise the fact that Evelyn was being sold to save her father's life. Damien Moretti stood at the altar like he owned it. Hell, he probably did own it. He owned half of Manhattan according to the rumors, and the other half just hadn't figured it out yet. Tall, broad-shouldered, silver threading through dark hair that was slicked back with the kind of precision that screamed control freak. His tuxedo fit like it had been sewn directly onto his body by tailors who understood exactly how intimidating wealth could look, but it was his eyes that made her knees weak. Dark, patient, predatory. He wasn't looking at her like a bride. He was looking at her like prey he'd already caught and was deciding how long to play with before devouring completely. Evelyn's father sat in his wheelchair at the front row, oxygen tubes running into his nose, skin the color of old newspapers. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer. 6 months to live, the doctors said, unless someone paid for the experimental treatment that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Damien had paid. In cash. The same day he'd made his proposal. Not a marriage proposal. A business proposal. Your daughter for your life. Simple math. The officiant was saying something. Words about love and commitment and forever. Evelyn heard none of it. Blood rushed too loudly in her ears. Her hands trembled so badly she could barely hold the bouquet of white peonies that matched the arrangements lining every available surface. Someone had gone all out making this look like a real wedding. The irony made her want to scream. "Do you, Evelyn Marie Hart, take this man?" "She does," her mother called out from the second row, voice cracking, like she couldn't trust Evelyn to say the words herself. Damien's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Not quite. The officiant cleared his throat. "The bride needs to answer herself, ma'am." Silence dropped over the chapel like a heavy blanket. Evelyn could feel 200 pairs of eyes drilling into her back. Damien's associates, business partners, the kind of people who wore expensive cologne to hide the smell of blood on their hands. She forced herself to look up at Damien. He tilted his head slightly, studying her face with the intensity of someone memorizing every detail. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that only she could hear. "You can say no." Her breath caught. "I won't hurt your father," Damien continued, still in that quiet voice that somehow managed to sound more dangerous than shouting. "The medical bills are paid regardless, but if you walk away now, I will remember. And the next time your family needs something from me, the answer will be no." Translation: choose carefully. Evelyn's throat felt like sandpaper. "I do." The words tasted like ash. Damien's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Satisfaction, maybe? Or disappointment that she hadn't called his bluff. The ceremony continued in a blur of ritualistic motions that felt choreographed by someone with a sick sense of humor. Rings exchanged, vows repeated. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife with all the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. "You may kiss the bride." Damien stepped closer, close enough that Evelyn could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive with notes of cedar and smoke. His hand came up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't move. His fingers curled under her chin, tilting her face up with a gentleness that contradicted everything she'd heard about him. The kiss was brief, controlled. His lips barely brushed hers before he pulled back, leaving her more confused than before. The chapel erupted in polite applause that sounded rehearsed. Damien's hand moved to the small of her back, possessive and burning hot, even through the layers of fabric. He guided her down the aisle while cameras flashed and guests threw rice that pelted against her veil like hailstones. A black Rolls-Royce waited outside, rain still coming down in sheets that turned the Manhattan streets into rivers of reflected neon. Damien's driver held an umbrella over them while opening the rear door. "After you, Mrs. Moretti." The name hit her like a slap. She climbed into the leather interior that smelled new and expensive. Damien slid in beside her, filling the space with his presence in a way that made the luxury car suddenly feel claustrophobic. The door closed. They were alone. The driver pulled away from the chapel, windshield wipers working overtime against the downpour. Manhattan blurred past the tinted windows, buildings and streetlights bleeding together into abstract smears of light and shadow. Evelyn kept her eyes locked on the window, watching the city drift by while her heart tried to hammer its way out of her chest. "You're afraid of me." It wasn't a question. Damien stated it like a fact he found mildly interesting. "I'm not stupid," Evelyn shot back before she could stop herself. Silence stretched between them for 3 long blocks. When Damien finally spoke again, his voice carried a note of amusement that made her skin prickle. "I heard what you said in the bathroom earlier." Ice flooded through her veins. "My head of security thought I should know that my bride-to-be was confident a man my age couldn't possibly satisfy her." He paused, letting the words sink in like stones into deep water. "Emotionally or physically, I believe were your exact words." Evelyn's face burned. She wanted to die. Actually genuinely wanted the leather seat to open up and swallow her whole. "That was," she started. "Honest," Damien interrupted, "which I appreciate more than you know. Most people lie to me constantly. It's refreshing." He shifted in his seat, angling toward her in the darkness. The city lights painted half his face in shadow, making him look carved from marble and malice. "I'm going to give you a choice," he said quietly. "When we get to the penthouse, you can sleep in the guest room. Separate spaces, separate lives. A marriage on paper only. Your father gets his treatment. You get your freedom. In a year, we file for divorce and go our separate ways." Evelyn's pulse kicked up. "And the second option?" Damien's smile was slow and dangerous. "You let me prove you wrong." The Rolls-Royce pulled up to a building in Tribeca that looked like it cost more than entire zip codes. Art Deco architecture mixed with modern glass in a way that screamed old money meeting new power. A doorman in a uniform that probably cost more than Evelyn's college tuition rushed forward with an umbrella. They rode the private elevator to the penthouse in silence. Evelyn counted floors. 23, 24, 25. The doors opened directly into the apartment. Evelyn stepped out and stopped breathing. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Manhattan like a sprawling kingdom laid out for their viewing pleasure. The furniture was all clean lines and dark leather, expensive minimalism that somehow managed to feel lived in rather than sterile. Original artwork hung on the walls, pieces she recognized from auction catalogs her art history professor used to show in class. A Basquiat, a Rothko, a goddamn Monet over the fireplace. "The guest room is down that hallway," Damien said, shrugging out of his tuxedo jacket. He draped it over the back of a leather armchair with casual grace. "Second door on the left, bathrooms attached. There's a walk-in closet already stocked with clothes in your size." Evelyn stared at him. "How did you—" "I'm thorough." He loosened his bow tie with one hand, the motion so practiced it looked choreographed. His other hand went to the crystal decanter sitting on the bar cart, pouring 2 fingers of amber liquid into a heavy glass. "There's food in the kitchen if you're hungry. Help yourself to anything. This is your home now." He raised the glass to his lips. "For however long you want it to be." "I don't understand." Damien turned to face her fully, leaning back against the bar cart with an ease that made him look dangerous and comfortable all at once. You thought I was going to force you into my bed. Heat crept up Evelyn's neck. Isn't that how this works? Maybe for men who need to take what they want because no one would give it willingly. He took another sip of whiskey, eyes never leaving hers. I don't need to take anything from you, Evelyn. I can afford to be patient. Patient for what? His smile was all teeth and dark promises. For you to realize you're curious. Before she could respond, Damien pushed off the bar cart and headed toward a different hallway, presumably toward his own bedroom. He paused at the entrance, glancing back over his shoulder. Sleep well, Mrs. Moretti. We have a busy week ahead. Then he disappeared, leaving Evelyn standing alone in a penthouse that cost more than most people's dreams, wearing a wedding dress she couldn't unzip by herself, married to a man who terrified and intrigued her in equal measure. She found the guest room exactly where he'd said. The bed was king-sized with sheets that probably had a thread count higher than her credit score. The closet was indeed stocked with clothes, designer labels in her exact size, from casual jeans to cocktail dresses to pajamas made of silk so soft it felt like water against her skin. Evelyn stripped out of the wedding dress with shaking hands, letting it pool on the floor in a heap of white fabric and broken expectations. She pulled on the silk pajamas and crawled into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. Sleep didn't come. Her mind kept replaying Damien's words on a loop. I can afford to be patient. For you to realize you're curious. The worst part was that he was right. She was curious, and that terrified her more than anything else that had happened tonight. Morning arrived with sunlight streaming through windows that didn't have curtains. Evelyn groaned and buried her face in the pillow, trying to block out the brightness and the reality of where she was. A soft knock echoed from the door. "Come in," she called, voice rough with sleep. The door opened. A woman in her 50s stepped inside, professionally dressed in slacks and a crisp blouse, carrying a tray that smelled like heaven. "Good morning, Mrs. Moretti. I'm Margaret, Mr. Moretti's housekeeper." She set the tray on the nightstand, coffee, fresh fruit, pastries that looked like they came from a bakery that didn't list prices on the menu. "Mr. Moretti asked me to let you know he had business this morning, but will be back for lunch. He suggested you make yourself comfortable and explore the apartment." Evelyn sat up slowly. "Where is he?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss Mr. Moretti's schedule, ma'am, but he left this for you." Margaret handed her a small envelope before quietly excusing herself. Evelyn opened it with fingers that still trembled slightly. Inside was a black American Express card with her name embossed in silver letters, no spending limit, and a note in handwriting that was surprisingly elegant for someone who supposedly made his fortune breaking kneecaps. "Buy whatever you want. Go wherever you want. The driver is at your disposal. I'll see you at 1 o'clock. D. She stared at the card. This was a test. It had to be. He was waiting to see if she'd max it out, if she'd run, if she'd do something predictable that confirmed whatever assumptions he'd already made about her. Evelyn set the card on the nightstand and grabbed her coffee instead. The apartment looked different in daylight. Less intimidating, more like an actual home where someone lived rather than a museum showcasing wealth. She wandered through rooms, cataloging details. A library with first editions organized by author. A gym that put most commercial facilities to shame. A kitchen with appliances she didn't recognize but suspected cost more than cars. She found Damien's bedroom by accident. The door was cracked open. She knew she shouldn't look, knew it was a violation of the boundaries he'd set last night. She looked anyway. His room was surprisingly sparse. A massive bed with black sheets, a single nightstand with a lamp and whatever book he was currently reading, something in Italian she couldn't translate. No personal photographs, no decorations, nothing that revealed who he was beyond the expensive suits hanging in his closet and the watch collection displayed in a glass case. It felt lonely. Evelyn backed away before she could analyze why that observation made her chest ache. She spent the morning reading in the library, curled up in a leather chair that smelled like old books and expensive tobacco. Margaret brought her lunch at 12:30, a salad with grilled chicken that somehow tasted better than anything Evelyn had ever made herself. Damien arrived at 1 o'clock exactly. He came through the door in a different suit, charcoal gray this time, looking like he'd stepped out of a boardroom rather than whatever criminal enterprise actually paid for all this. His tie was already loosened, top button undone in a way that suggested the day had been long. "How was your morning?" he asked, setting his briefcase on the entry table. Quiet. Good. He shrugged out of his suit jacket, draping it over the same chair as last night. Apparently that was his designated jacket chair. We have dinner with my associates tonight, 7 o'clock, something semi-formal. Evelyn's stomach dropped. I have to go? You're my wife. Damien crossed to the bar cart, pouring himself the same whiskey from last night. People need to see us together. They need to believe this is real. It's not real. He turned to face her, glass in hand, expression unreadable. Then we're both excellent actors. The dinner was at a restaurant in the meatpacking district that didn't have a sign outside because the kind of people who ate there already knew where it was. Evelyn wore a black cocktail dress from the magical closet, paired with heels that made her legs look longer, and her confidence feel faker. Damien's hand found the small of her back the moment they exited the car. Smile, he murmured against her ear. You're supposed to be madly in love with me, remember? I'm supposed to be terrified of you. That too. The restaurant's interior was all dark wood and dim lighting, the kind of ambiance that made everything look like a scene from a mob movie, which, Evelyn realized with growing horror, this essentially was. Damien's associates were exactly what she expected. Middle-aged men in expensive suits with eyes that had seen things they'd never talk about in polite company. Their wives wore jewelry that could fund small countries and smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Damien, one of them said, standing to shake hands. Congratulations on the wedding. She's lovely. He said it like Evelyn wasn't standing right there. Thank you, Marco. Damien's hand tightened slightly on Evelyn's back. This is my wife, Evelyn. She forced a smile. Nice to meet you. Dinner was an exercise in torture disguised as fine dining. Course after course of food she couldn't taste because her nerves had killed her appetite. Conversation flowed around her in Italian and English, business talk barely disguised as social pleasantries. Damien played his role perfectly. Attentive husband, hand on her thigh under the table, whispered comments in her ear that looked intimate but were actually warnings about who not to trust in the room. Marco's lying about the shipment numbers, he murmured while pretending to kiss her temple. And Salvatore's wife is sleeping with his accountant. Evelyn nearly choked on her wine. The dinner dragged on for 3 hours. By the time they finally escaped back to the Rolls-Royce, Evelyn's face hurt from fake smiling and her feet screamed from the heels. Damien waited until they were alone in the car before speaking. You did well tonight. I didn't do anything. Exactly. You didn't panic, didn't say anything stupid, didn't give them any ammunition to use against me later. He turned slightly in his seat, studying her in the darkness. That's harder than it sounds. Evelyn stared out the window at Manhattan sliding past. Is this what my life is now? Performing for dangerous men while pretending I'm not terrified? Only when necessary. And when it's not necessary? Damien was quiet for a long moment. When he finally answered, his voice was softer than she'd heard it before. Then you get to be yourself. Something in his tone made her look at him. Really look at him. The streetlights painted shadows across his face, highlighting the silver in his hair and the lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled less than he should. Who are you? She asked quietly. When you're not performing? His expression shifted. Surprise, maybe. Like no one had ever asked him that question before. I have no idea, he admitted. The honesty in those 4 words hit her harder than any threat could have. They rode the rest of the way in silence. A week passed, then 2. Evelyn fell into a routine she hadn't expected. Morning coffee on the balcony overlooking Manhattan. Afternoons in the library or exploring the city with the driver Damien insisted she take everywhere. Evenings either alone while Damien worked late or together at dinners and events where she played the role of devoted wife. He never pushed, never demanded, never even hinted that he expected anything beyond the performance they put on for other people. It was driving her insane, because Evelyn was starting to notice things. The way Damien's entire body relaxed when he came home and found her reading in the library. How he always made sure there was fresh coffee waiting for her in the morning, even on days when he left before dawn. The subtle way he positioned himself between her and anything he perceived as a threat, doorways, strangers, even his own associates. It was possessive, protective, confusing as hell, and worse, she was starting to like it. She caught herself watching him during a business dinner in Little Italy. The way his hands moved when he talked, confident and controlled. The authority in his voice when he gave orders that people followed without question. The sharp intelligence behind his eyes when he negotiated deals that probably involved more money than she'd see in a lifetime. Damien Moretti was terrifying. He was also the most compelling person she'd ever met. "You're staring." Evelyn jerked her attention back to her plate. They were alone now, the business associates having left 20 minutes ago. The restaurant had cleared out except for them and the staff who waited at a respectful distance. "I was thinking," she said defensively. "About? How strange this all is." Damien leaned back in his chair, wine glass dangling from his fingers with casual elegance. "Strange how?" "You don't act like I expected." His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Disappointed?" "Confused. Because I haven't tried to force myself on you?" Heat crept up her neck. "Because you act like you actually care whether I'm comfortable." "I do care." The simple statement knocked the air from her lungs. Damien set his wine glass down and leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her feel pinned in place. "You think because I run a criminal organization I'm incapable of human decency? That I can't want my wife to be happy? I'm not really your wife. Legally you are, and legally is all that matters in my world." Evelyn's hands trembled slightly. She pressed them flat against her thighs under the table. "What do you want from me, Damien?" He studied her for a long moment, expression unreadable. "I want you to stop being afraid of me." "I'm not." "You are. Every time I walk into a room, you tense up. Every time I touch you in public, you flinch before remembering you're supposed to look happy about it." His voice dropped lower, rough around the edges. "I want you to trust me. You bought me. I saved your father's life. By buying me." Damien's jaw tightened. "If that's how you need to see it." Silence crashed between them like a physical thing. The restaurant felt too small suddenly, too intimate, the low lighting making everything feel like a confession waiting to happen. "Why me?" Evelyn asked finally. "You could have married anyone, someone who wanted this, someone from your world who understood the rules." "Because you're real." She blinked. "What?" Damien stood abruptly, pulling out his wallet and dropping enough cash on the table to cover the meal 3 times over. He offered her his hand. "Let's go home." The Rolls-Royce was waiting outside. They slid into the back seat in silence, the partition between them and the driver already raised. Manhattan blurred past the windows in familiar patterns now. Evelyn had memorized the route from Little Italy to Tribeca, could probably navigate it herself if she had to. "Everyone in my world wants something from me," Damien said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "Power, money, protection. They smile and lie and pretend to be loyal while plotting how to take what's mine." He turned to look at her, shadows playing across his face. "You don't pretend. You don't hide what you're thinking. Even when you're terrified, you're honest about it." "That's a stupid reason to marry someone." "Probably." His admission surprised her into almost smiling. "So what now?" she asked. Damien's eyes dropped to her mouth for just a second before returning to hers. "Now we see how long it takes before you stop flinching when I touch you." The challenge in his voice made something low in her stomach tighten. They reached the penthouse. Rode the elevator in silence. Stepped into the apartment that had started to feel less foreign and more like home. Evelyn kicked off her heels the moment they cleared the door, groaning in relief as her feet hit the cool hardwood. When she looked up, Damien was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" "Nothing." He loosened his tie, that same practiced motion she'd seen a dozen times now. "You look different when you're comfortable." "Different how?" "Younger. Happier." He paused. "Real." The word again. Real. Evelyn crossed to the windows overlooking the city, pressing her palm against the cool glass. Below, Manhattan pulsed with life. Cars and people and lights that never stopped moving. She heard Damien approach before she felt him. His presence had a weight to it, a gravity that pulled at something in her chest. He stopped close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him, not touching, just there. "I'm losing my mind," he said quietly. Evelyn's breath caught. "What?" "Trying not to touch you." His voice was rougher now, frayed around the edges in a way she'd never heard before. Watching you walk around my home in those goddamn silk pajamas, listening to you laugh on the phone with your friends, seeing you curled up in my library reading books I picked out thinking you might like them. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Damien, tell me to stop, and I will. He was closer now, close enough that she could smell his cologne and the whiskey on his breath. Tell me you don't feel this thing between us, and I'll never bring it up again. Separate rooms, separate lives, just like I promised. Evelyn turned slowly to face him. He looked wrecked, hair disheveled from running his hands through it, tie hanging loose, eyes dark with something that made her knees weak. I can't tell you that, she whispered. Damien's control snapped. His mouth crashed against hers with the intensity of a storm breaking. Not gentle, not patient, just raw need and hunger and weeks of restraint finally shattering into pieces. Evelyn gasped against his lips, and he swallowed the sound, one hand tangling in her hair while the other gripped her waist hard enough to bruise. She grabbed his shirt for balance, the expensive fabric bunching in her fists as he backed her against the window. The glass was cold against her spine. Damien was burning hot everywhere else. He kissed like he did everything else, with absolute authority and devastating precision. His tongue swept against hers, and Evelyn heard herself make a sound she'd never made before, something desperate and pleading that should have embarrassed her, but only seemed to drive him harder. Tell me to stop, he demanded against her mouth, giving her one last chance. Evelyn yanked him closer by his shirt. Don't you fucking dare! Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Then he was lifting her, her legs wrapping around his waist automatically as he carried her away from the windows. She expected him to head toward a bedroom. Instead, he sat down on the leather couch, pulling her into his lap so she straddled him. The new position put them at eye level, her hands braced on his shoulders, his fingers digging into her hips. You're sure about this? He asked, voice wrecked. Evelyn answered by kissing him again. The rest of the world disappeared. Later, hours later, they lay tangled together on his bed, sheets twisted around them, Manhattan glowing outside the windows like a constellation of broken promises and second chances. Damien's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, his breathing finally steady after what had been the most intense few hours of Evelyn's life. Still think I'm too old for you? He asked, amusement threading through his voice. Evelyn turned to look at him, taking in the silver in his hair and the satisfied smile on his face, and the way his eyes had gone soft in a way she suspected most people never got to see. Ask me again in the morning, she whispered. But even as she said it, curled against his chest with his heartbeat thundering under her ear, Evelyn knew the terrifying truth. She was falling for him. Actually, genuinely falling for the most dangerous man in New York, and she had absolutely no idea how this story was going to end. 3 weeks of something close to happiness. That's all they got before the blood started. Evelyn was shopping in Soho with 2 of Damien's security guards trailing at a discreet distance. She'd stopped fighting the protection detail after Damien had explained, with unusual patience, that being his wife made her a target for anyone who wanted leverage against him. The boutique was expensive and bright, full of clothes she still wasn't entirely comfortable buying, even though Damien had made it clear his money was hers now. She was examining a silk blouse when the first gunshot shattered the storefront window. Glass exploded inward in a shower of diamond-bright shards. Someone screamed, then everyone was screaming. Evelyn's security guard, Marcus, a former Marine who took his job terrifyingly seriously, grabbed her arm and yanked her toward the back of the store. Get down! More gunshots, rapid fire, professional. This wasn't random, this was an execution. Marcus shoved her behind a clothing rack, his body covering hers as bullets tore through expensive fabric and wooden displays. She could smell gunpowder and fear sweat and the copper tang of blood. Stay down, Marcus barked, pulling his own weapon. Don't move until I... His head snapped back, blood sprayed across white silk blouses. Marcus collapsed on top of her, dead weight pinning her to the floor. Evelyn couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what was happening as warm blood soaked through her clothes and Marcus's eyes stared at nothing. Footsteps approached, heavy boots on broken glass. A man appeared, gun raised, searching, looking for her. Evelyn pressed herself flatter against the floor, trapped under Marcus's body, watching through a gap in the clothing rack as the shooter methodically checked the store. He was going to find her. She was going to die in a Soho boutique under a dead bodyguard while wearing clothes that cost more than her father's hospital bills. The shooter turned her direction. Then a second gunshot, this one from outside, and the man jerked forward, blood blooming across his chest. Her second security guard, James, appeared in the doorway, weapon raised, scanning for more threats. "Mrs. Moretti!" He rushed forward, shoving Marcus's body aside with apologies Evelyn couldn't hear over the ringing in her ears. "Are you hit? Mrs. Moretti, talk to me!" Evelyn tried to speak. Nothing came out. James was on his phone, barking orders in a voice that suggested he'd done this before. Extracting, casualties, medic. The words blurred together. Then she saw the blood. Her blood. Spreading across her cream-colored blouse like a blooming rose. "I'm hit," she whispered, surprised by how calm she sounded. "James, I'm hit." Everything after that happened in fragments. James carrying her out of the store. The street full of police cars and sirens. People with cameras filming while she bled. An ambulance with lights that hurt her eyes. Damien appeared out of nowhere. One second she was being loaded into the ambulance. The next he was there, shoving past paramedics with a violence that suggested they were lucky he didn't shoot them for being in his way. Evelyn. His voice cracked on her name. She'd never heard him sound like that. Desperate, terrified, human. "I'm okay," she tried to say, but the words came out slurred. The paramedics were yelling at Damien to get out of the way. He ignored them completely, grabbing her hand with fingers that shook. "Don't close your eyes," he ordered. "Evelyn, look at me. Don't you dare close your fucking eyes." She wanted to tell him she was tired. That closing her eyes sounded really nice, actually, but the look on his face stopped her. Damien Moretti, the man who'd built an empire on fear and violence and ruthless calculation, looked absolutely shattered. The ambulance doors slammed shut. Evelyn's vision tunneled. The last thing she heard before everything went dark was Damien's voice, raw and broken. "Don't leave me. Please, baby, don't leave me." Then nothing. Evelyn woke up to the sound of machines beeping and the smell of antiseptic that made her want to vomit. Her shoulder felt like someone had driven a railroad spike through it and left it there to rust. Every breath sent fresh waves of agony radiating down her arm and across her chest. She tried to move. Bad idea. "Don't!" Damien's voice came from somewhere to her left, rough as gravel. "The doctor said you need to stay still." Evelyn turned her head slowly, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights. Damien sat in a chair pulled up beside her hospital bed, still wearing the same suit from how long ago? His shirt was wrinkled and stained with blood. Her blood. His tie hung loose around his neck like a noose he'd forgotten to tighten. But it was his face that stopped her heart. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Red-rimmed eyes, stubble darkening his jaw. Hair disheveled from running his hands through it too many times. He looked less like a mafia boss and more like a man who'd stared into the abyss and found it staring back. "How long?" Her voice came out cracked and dry. 36 hours. Damien leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "You went into surgery 8 hours after the shooting. They had to remove the bullet and repair the damage to your shoulder. You lost a lot of blood." Evelyn processed this slowly, her brain still foggy from whatever drugs they'd pumped into her system. "Marcus?" Damien's expression went carefully blank. "Dead before the ambulance arrived." The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd known it already, had watched him die on top of her, but hearing it confirmed made it real in a way that brought tears burning to her eyes. "James?" "Alive. Minor injuries. He's the reason you're not dead." Damien's voice dropped lower. "He killed 3 of them before backup arrived." 3? Evelyn's head spun. "How many were there?" 5 that we know of. Professional hit squad. Well-armed, well-trained. They knew exactly where you'd be and when. His jaw clenched hard enough that she could see the muscle jumping. "Someone gave them your schedule." The implications of that statement settled over the room like a shroud. "You have a leak," Evelyn whispered. "Had a leak." Something dark and violent flashed across Damien's face. "I've spent the last 36 hours fixing that problem." She didn't ask what fixing meant. She didn't want to know. A nurse entered, all professional efficiency and cheerful demeanor that felt obscene given the circumstances. She checked Evelyn's vitals, adjusted her IV, made notes on a tablet. "Your heart stopped during surgery," the nurse said conversationally, like she was discussing the weather. 41 seconds. The doctors managed to get you back, but it was touch and go for a while there. Evelyn stared at her. "I died?" "Technically, yes. But you're here now, so let's focus on that." The nurse smiled with practiced optimism. "You're very lucky, Mrs. Moretti. A few inches to the left, and the bullet would have hit your heart directly. As it is, you're looking at 6 to 8 weeks of recovery and physical therapy for full range of motion in that shoulder." The nurse left with instructions about pain management and rest that Evelyn barely heard over the ringing in her ears. She died. For 41 seconds, she'd been gone. "Evelyn." Damien's voice pulled her back from the edge of whatever spiral she was falling into. "Look at me." She forced her eyes to focus on his face. "You're alive," he said firmly. "That's all that matters right now. You're alive and you're going to recover, and I'm going to make sure nothing like this ever happens again." "How?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "You just said someone on the inside gave them my schedule. How do you stop that? How do you trust anyone now?" Damien's expression went cold in a way that reminded her exactly who she'd married. "I don't trust anyone. That's how." Before Evelyn could respond, the door opened again. This time it was a doctor, middle-aged, tired-looking, with the kind of calm competence that suggested he'd seen worse and lived to talk about it. "Mrs. Moretti, good to see you awake." He pulled up her chart on his tablet. "I'm Dr. Richardson. I performed your surgery. How's the pain?" "Manageable." "Liar." Dr. Richardson glanced at Damien. "She needs to rest. No stress, no excitement, minimal movement for at least a week." "She'll have around-the-clock care," Damien said immediately. "Here or at home?" "Home." Dr. Richardson frowned. "Mr. Moretti, I really think my home is safer than this hospital." Damien's tone left no room for argument. "I'll hire private nurses. Whatever medical equipment she needs. But she's not staying here where anyone can walk in off the street." The doctor looked like he wanted to protest. One look at Damien's face made him reconsider. "I'll prepare the discharge paperwork, but any complications, any at all, and she comes straight back here. Understood?" "Understood." 3 hours later, Evelyn was being wheeled out of the hospital through a service entrance while a decoy ambulance left through the front to draw off the reporters and photographers who'd been camped outside since the shooting. Damien's Rolls-Royce waited in an underground parking garage, surrounded by 6 security vehicles that looked more like military transports than civilian cars. The drive back to the penthouse felt surreal. Manhattan passed by the windows looking exactly the same as it had 2 days ago, completely unchanged by the fact that Evelyn had almost died on its streets. The penthouse had been transformed into something between a hospital room and a fortress. Medical equipment occupied one corner of the master bedroom. Monitors, IV stands, enough supplies to run a small clinic. The windows, already bulletproof, now had additional security shutters that could drop at the press of a button. Armed guards patrolled the hallways in shifts that never left the apartment unprotected. Damien had moved everything from her guest room into his. Her clothes in his closet, her books on his nightstand, her toothbrush next to his in the bathroom. "You're not sleeping alone anymore," he said when he caught her staring at the changes. "Non-negotiable." Evelyn was too tired to argue. A private nurse, stern-faced woman named Patricia, who looked like she could wrestle a bear and win, helped her into bed and ran through medication schedules and wound care procedures that made Evelyn's head spin. Damien listened to every word, taking notes on his phone with the same intensity he probably applied to business deals worth millions. When Patricia finally left them alone, silence settled over the room like a weighted blanket. Damien stood by the windows, staring out at the city with his hands shoved in his pockets and tension radiating off him in waves. "You should sleep," Evelyn said quietly. "Can't." "When's the last time you slept?" He didn't answer. "Damien, I can't close my eyes without seeing you bleeding out on that ambulance floor." His voice was raw, stripped of the control he usually maintained. "Without hearing the doctors say your heart stopped. Without watching them shock you back to life while I stood there completely fucking useless." Evelyn's chest tightened. "I'm okay now. You died, Evelyn. He turned to face her, and the look on his face made her breath catch. For 41 seconds, you were gone, and I... He stopped, jaw working. I've killed people, ruined lives, built an empire on violence and fear, but sitting in that waiting room knowing I might lose you was the first time in 20 years I felt genuinely terrified. I'm right here. This time. He crossed to the bed, sitting on the edge carefully so he didn't jostle her injured shoulder. Next time, they might succeed. So what are you going to do? Damien's eyes went dark. Whatever it takes to make sure there is no next time. The weight in those words made something cold settle in Evelyn's stomach. What does that mean? It means I'm going to war. Before she could ask what that meant exactly, exhaustion pulled at her like a riptide. The pain medication Patricia had given her was kicking in, making everything soft and distant. Damien seemed to notice. He stood, pulling the covers up around her with surprising gentleness. Sleep. I'll be right here. You need to sleep too. I will. Eventually. Evelyn wanted to argue, but her eyes were already closing. The last thing she felt before darkness claimed her was Damien's hand wrapping carefully around hers, holding on like she might disappear if he let go. The next week passed in a haze of pain medication and forced rest. Evelyn slept more than she'd ever slept in her life. When she was awake, Patricia ran her through gentle exercises meant to prevent her shoulder from stiffening while Damien worked from the bedroom, laptop balanced on his knees, phone constantly pressed to his ear. She caught fragments of conversations. Don't care what his excuse is. I want him found. Triple security on all shipments until further notice. No, not arrested. I want him brought directly to me. The violence in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel something close to safe. Damien barely left the bedroom except for meetings that couldn't be conducted remotely. Even then, he had the penthouse turned into a temporary headquarters, his associates coming and going at all hours while guards checked IDs at the door and swept everyone for weapons. Evelyn's father called daily, his voice shaking with guilt and fear. She reassured him she was fine, that it wasn't his fault, that she'd be back on her feet soon. She didn't mention that every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus's head snapping back, blood spraying across white silk. On the 5th day, she was finally strong enough to shower by herself. Patricia helped her into the bathroom, standing guard outside while Evelyn stripped off the hospital gown she'd been living in and stepped under water hot enough to scald. The first glimpse of the wound in the mirror nearly made her vomit. Angry red surgical incisions crossed her shoulder in a pattern that looked like someone had tried to piece her back together with staples and prayers. Bruising spread across her chest in shades of purple and yellow that made her look like a rotten piece of fruit. She was damaged, broken, a liability. Evelyn pressed her forehead against the cool tile and let the tears come, mixing with shower water until she couldn't tell the difference. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a towel with her wet hair dripping down her back, Damien was sitting on the bed, waiting. He took one look at her face and knew. Come here. She crossed to him slowly, wincing as the movement pulled at her shoulder. Damien guided her to sit between his legs, his hands gentle as he took another towel and began carefully drying her hair. Neither of them spoke. Evelyn focused on breathing, on the feeling of his fingers working through the tangles, on anything except the fact that she'd almost died and people were still trying to kill her, and this man, this dangerous, complicated, impossible man, was the only thing standing between her and the next bullet. I love you. The words fell out of her mouth before she could stop them. Damien's hand stilled in her hair. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. She hadn't meant to say it, hadn't planned it. The pain medication must have loosened something in her brain that controlled the filter between thoughts and speech. I'm sorry, she started. I didn't mean... Say it again. His voice was rough, demanding. Evelyn turned carefully to look at him. Damien's expression was intense enough to burn, his eyes locked on hers with a focus that made her feel pinned in place. I love you, she repeated, quieter this time. I know that's insane. I know we barely know each other, and this whole thing started as a business transaction, and you're probably going to say, I'm just confused because you saved my life, but... Damien kissed her. Not gentle. Not careful. Just pure desperate need poured into the press of his mouth against hers. When he pulled back, his breathing was ragged. I fell in love with you the first night in this apartment, he said roughly, watching you explore the library like you were discovering treasure, reading in that goddamn chair wearing silk pajamas that were going to kill me, being brave and honest and real in a world full of people who are none of those things. Evelyn's eyes burned. You never said anything. Because you were terrified of me. Because I'd bought you like property. Because you deserved better than a man twice your age who's killed more people than he can count. His hand came up to cup her face with devastating gentleness. But then you started looking at me differently, started trusting me, started wanting me back. And I thought maybe I could have this, have you, actually keep something good in my life for once. You can, Evelyn whispered. You do. And then some bastards tried to take you from me. The softness in his expression hardened into something lethal. So now I'm going to burn their entire organization to the ground and salt the earth so nothing ever grows there again. The promise in his voice should have horrified her. It didn't. When? She asked quietly. Soon, when you're stronger, when I know you're safe. His thumb traced along her cheekbone. I need you to promise me something. What? That you'll stay here, in this apartment, with full security, until this is over. Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to say she wasn't going to be a prisoner in her own home, but the memory of gunfire and screaming and Marcus's dead eyes stopped the protest before it could form. I promise. Relief flickered across Damien's face. Thank you. He helped her get dressed in loose pajamas that didn't pull at her shoulder, then settled them both into bed with her tucked carefully against his uninjured side. Tell me something, Evelyn said after a long silence. Something real. Like what? I don't know. Something from before. Before all this. Before you became... Gestured vaguely at the armed guards visible through the bedroom door. Damien was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant. I grew up in Brooklyn. My father ran a small numbers operation out of a bakery in Bay Ridge. Nothing big. Nothing important. Just enough to put food on the table and keep my mother in the kind of dresses she liked. He paused. When I was 16, a rival crew decided they wanted his territory. They walked into the bakery during Sunday dinner service and shot him in front of 70 customers. Evelyn's breath caught. My mother never recovered, died 2 years later. Heart attack, the doctor said, but I knew better. She died from grief. His fingers tightened slightly where they rested against her hip. I was 18 when I killed the men who murdered my father, 20 when I took over their entire operation, 25 when I owned half of Brooklyn, 30 when politicians started taking my calls. And now? Now I'm 40 years old, in love with a woman half my age, and realizing that everything I built was just a distraction from the fact that I've been alone since my parents died. He looked down at her, something vulnerable flickering behind the hardness. Until you. Evelyn pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of his cologne mixed with the laundry detergent the housekeeper used. I'm not going anywhere, she promised. You better not. They fell asleep like that, tangled together in expensive sheets while armed guards patrolled outside and the city glowed beyond bulletproof windows. For a few hours, the world felt almost peaceful. Saucet. Reality crashed back in 3 days later. Evelyn was in the library reading when Damien came home early, his expression carved from granite and violence. One look at his face told her everything she needed to know. You found who leaked my schedule. Yes. Who? Damien's jaw clenched. My cousin, Antonio. He's been with me for 15 years. I trusted him with my life, with your life. The betrayal in his voice made her chest ache. What are you going to do? What I have to do. Evelyn set her book aside carefully. Meaning? Meaning he sold you out to the Calabrese family for $200,000 and a promise they'd leave him alive when they came for me. Damien's hands curled into fists at his sides. He knew exactly where you'd be shopping. He gave them your schedule down to the minute. Marcus died because Antonio wanted money. Rage flashed hot through Evelyn's veins. Where is he now? Somewhere very uncomfortable answering very specific questions about who else in my organization can't be trusted. The clinical way he said it made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. And when he's done answering questions? Damien looked at her with eyes gone cold and empty. Then he stops being a problem. Evelyn should have been horrified. should have recoiled from the casual acknowledgement of murder in his voice. Instead, she found herself asking, "Can I watch?" Damien blinked, surprise cracking through his carefully maintained control. "What? Can I watch?" She stood slowly, her shoulder still protesting the movement, but stronger now than it had been days ago. "He tried to have me killed. He got Marcus killed. I want to look him in the eye when he realizes what's coming." For a long moment, Damien just stared at her like he was seeing someone completely different from the terrified girl who'd walked down that aisle 6 weeks ago. "You're serious?" "Completely." Something dangerous and appreciative flickered across his face. "You understand what you're asking? This isn't going to be clean. It's not going to be quick. And once you see that side of my world, you can't unsee it." "I already saw it when Marcus died on top of me." Evelyn's voice came out harder than she'd ever heard it. "I already lived through it when my heart stopped for 41 seconds. I'm not asking to participate. I'm asking to witness the consequences." Damien studied her for another beat, then nodded slowly. "Tomorrow night." "Where?" "A warehouse in Red Hook, off the books. No witnesses except the people I trust with my life, which is a very short list right now." Evelyn nodded. "I'll be ready." The warehouse smelled like rust and old fear. Evelyn stood in the shadows with Damien's hand wrapped protectively around her uninjured arm, watching 6 of his most trusted men drag Antonio into the center of the concrete floor. Antonio looked like he'd already been through hell. His face was swollen and bruised, one eye completely shut, blood crusted around his nose and mouth. They'd stripped him to his undershirt and pants, probably searching for weapons or wires. When he saw Damien, something that might have been hope flickered across his battered features. "Damien, cousin, thank God. These men, they've been doing exactly what I told them to do." Damien's voice cut through the warehouse like a blade. "Making sure you understand the severity of your situation." Antonio's remaining eye went wide. "What? No. Damien, I don't—" "You sold my wife's location to the Calabrese family for $200,000. Damien's tone was conversational, almost pleasant, the kind of pleasant that made Evelyn's skin crawl. "You gave them her schedule, the boutiques she liked, the routes her security detail used, everything they needed to execute a professional hit in broad daylight." "I didn't," Antonio started. "We have the wire transfers, Antonio. We have the text messages. We have recorded phone calls where you discussed exactly how to make it look like random gang violence." Damien took a step forward, and every man in the warehouse tensed. "Don't insult me by lying." Antonio's face crumpled, not with shame, with fear. "They threatened my family," he tried. "My wife, my kids. I didn't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice." Damien's voice dropped to something cold enough to freeze blood. "You chose money over loyalty. You chose your own survival over the life of a woman who never did anything to hurt you. You chose to betray 15 years of trust for a payoff that wouldn't even cover your gambling debts." Antonio tried to stand. 2 of Damien's men shoved him back down to his knees. "Please," Antonio begged. "I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. It was a mistake. It won't happen again. I'll do anything." "You're right. It won't happen again." Damien pulled a gun from inside his jacket with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Antonio started crying. No, please, Damien, cousin, I'm family." "Family protects each other." Damien's expression was carved from ice. Family doesn't sell each other out for money. Family doesn't get innocent people killed because they're too weak to face their own problems. He raised the gun. Antonio was screaming now, begging, promising things he'd never be able to deliver. Evelyn watched without flinching. This was the man who'd tried to have her murdered, who'd given Marcus a death sentence, who'd betrayed the person who trusted him most in the world. She felt nothing but cold satisfaction as Damien pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse like thunder. Antonio slumped forward, blood pooling beneath him in a spreading circle that reflected the overhead lights. Silence dropped over the space like a curtain. Damien lowered the gun slowly, his expression unchanged. He turned to his men with the same calm authority he probably used in business meetings. "Clean this up. Make sure nothing traces back to us. And find out if he told anyone else about our security protocols." The men moved immediately, efficient and professional. Damien turned to Evelyn. "Are you okay?" She considered the question honestly. Her shoulder ached. Her heart was racing. She'd just watched a man die and felt nothing but grim relief that he couldn't hurt anyone else. "I'm fine," she said finally. Damien studied her face like he was looking for cracks in her composure. Most people would be traumatized. Most people didn't almost die because of him. Something that might have been pride flickered across Damien's expression. He tucked the gun back into his jacket and offered her his hand. "Let's go home." The drive back to Manhattan was quiet. Evelyn stared out the window, processing what she'd just witnessed. What she'd just participated in by being there. The line she'd just crossed by watching a man die and feeling satisfied about it. She should feel guilty. She didn't. "You're not what I expected," Damien said quietly. Evelyn glanced at him. "What did you expect?" "Fear, disgust, maybe horror at what I just did." He paused. "Not calm acceptance." "He tried to kill me. He got Marcus killed. He betrayed you." She turned to face him fully. "What did you expect me to feel? Sympathy?" "Most people would try." "I'm not most people." Damien's hand found hers in the darkness, threading their fingers together. "No, you're really not." They rode the rest of the way in silence, hands linked, processing the violence they'd just participated in and the realization that neither of them felt particularly bad about it. When they got back to the penthouse, Evelyn headed straight for the shower, needing to wash away the smell of gunpowder and rust and blood. Damien followed her into the bathroom. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Making sure you're actually okay." "I told you I'm fine." "And I'm choosing not to believe you." Evelyn turned to face him, exhaustion and adrenaline crash hitting her all at once. "What do you want me to say, Damien? That I'm traumatized? That I can't handle your world? That watching Antonio die broke something inside me? I want you to be honest." "I am being honest." Her voice cracked. "I watched a man die tonight, and all I felt was relief that he can't hurt us anymore. I stood there in that warehouse and didn't flinch when you pulled the trigger. What does that make me?" "Mine," Damien said quietly. "It makes you mine." The certainty in his voice broke something loose in her chest. Evelyn crossed the distance between them and kissed him hard enough to bruise, pouring every complicated emotion churning inside her into the press of her mouth against his. Damien responded immediately, his hands coming up to frame her face with a desperation that matched her own. They stripped each other's clothes off between kisses, careful of her still healing shoulder, but beyond caring about much else. The shower ran hot enough to steam up the mirrors while they tangled together under the spray, washing away blood and violence and fear with something that felt dangerously close to redemption. Later, wrapped in towels and exhaustion, they collapsed into bed and held each other like anchors in a storm. "I meant what I said," Damien whispered against her hair. "You're mine, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to keep you safe. Even if it means starting a war? Especially if it means starting a war." Evelyn pressed closer, breathing in the scent of his skin mixed with expensive soap. "When does it start?" "It already has." Outside the windows, Manhattan glowed bright and indifferent, completely unaware that its criminal underworld was about to descend into chaos. Evelyn closed her eyes and let sleep claim her, safe in the knowledge that whatever came next, they'd face it together, even if it meant burning the entire city down. Morning arrived with news that spread through New York's criminal underground like wildfire. 4 Calabrese family warehouses had burned overnight. 2 of their high-ranking soldiers had disappeared. Their main drug distribution network had been compromised by federal raids that seemed suspiciously well-timed. Damien stood by the windows in his office, phone pressed to his ear, coordinating the opening moves of a war he'd been planning for days. "I don't care what concessions they're offering. The answer is no. They tried to kill my wife. There's no negotiation." Evelyn watched from the doorway, her arms still in a sling but her eyes clear and focused. This was the man she'd married, not the gentle husband who dried her hair, not the vulnerable man who'd confessed his childhood trauma, but the mafia boss who ruled New York's underground with calculated violence and absolute authority. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt something close to awe. Damien ended the call and turned to find her watching. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough." She crossed into the office, moving more easily now that the pain medication had been reduced. "They're scared." "They should be." "What happens next?" Damien's expression was carved from granite and determination. Next, I make it very clear that touching you was the last mistake the Calabrese family will ever make. Evelyn moved closer, studying the strategic maps and documents spread across his desk. Names, locations, business holdings, a comprehensive breakdown of an entire criminal organization laid bare. "You're going to destroy them completely," she said quietly. "Yes." "How long will it take?" "However long it takes." She looked up at him, this dangerous man who'd somehow become the center of her entire world. "And what do you need from me?" Damien's hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing along her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "I need you to trust me, and I need you to stay alive." His voice dropped lower, rougher. "Because if something happens to you while I'm doing this, I will burn this entire city to ashes and walk away without looking back." The promise in his words sent shivers down her spine. "I trust you," Evelyn whispered. Damien kissed her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with determination and something that looked dangerously close to devotion. "Then let's finish this." Outside, the sun rose over Manhattan, painting the city in shades of gold and crimson. Blood and fire. The war had begun. And this time, there would be no survivors on the other side. Quote, the war lasted 11 days before everything went to hell. Damien's campaign against the Calabrese family was surgical and merciless. Every night brought new attacks. Supply lines severed, safe houses raided, key operators disappearing into the kind of darkness people didn't come back from. The message was clear. You touch what's mine, I erase you from existence. Evelyn watched it unfold from the penthouse fortress, her shoulder healing slowly while Manhattan's criminal underworld tore itself apart below. She'd become comfortable with the violence in a way that should have disturbed her but didn't. Every Calabrese soldier who vanished was one less person who could put a bullet in her. On the 12th day, everything changed. Damien came home at 3 in the morning looking like he'd aged a decade in the hours since dinner. His suit was wrinkled, his tie hung loose, but it was his eyes that made Evelyn's stomach drop. They looked haunted in a way she'd never seen before. What happened? He poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey and downed it in one swallow, then poured another. "Damien, talk to me." "They have your father." The words hit her like a physical blow. Evelyn's knees went weak. She grabbed the back of the couch for support. "What?" "The Calabrese family kidnapped your father from the treatment facility 2 hours ago, walked right past security, disconnected him from his oxygen, took him out in a goddamn wheelchair while nurses watched." Damien's knuckles went white around the glass. "They left a message." He pulled out his phone and played a video that made Evelyn's blood turn to ice. Her father sat in a concrete room that could have been anywhere. He looked smaller than she remembered, frailer, the oxygen tubes back in his nose connected to a portable tank. His hands trembled in his lap. A voice off camera spoke in accented English. "Mr. Moretti, you've caused us considerable inconvenience, killed our people, destroyed our property, all because we tried to settle a simple business dispute." The camera panned to show a gun pressed against her father's temple. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to cease all hostile actions immediately. You're going to compensate us for our losses. $50 million seems fair. And you're going to deliver your wife to us personally as a gesture of good faith." Evelyn's father tried to speak. The man holding the gun slapped him hard enough that blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. "You have 48 hours. If we don't have what we want, we start sending pieces of dear old dad back to you, starting with fingers, then toes. Then we get creative." The voice took on a mocking tone. "We'll even live stream it so your wife can watch her father die slowly. Should be entertaining." The video ended. Silence crashed over the penthouse like a tidal wave. Evelyn couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her father, dying, terrified, held hostage because she'd married a man whose enemies used human lives as bargaining chips. "We're going to get him back," Damien said quietly. "How?" Her voice cracked. "They want me. That's the price." "You're not going anywhere near them." "He's my father, and you're my wife." Damien slammed the glass down hard enough that it should have shattered. "I'm not trading you for him. I'm not negotiating with people who think they can leverage your family to control me. That's not how this works." Evelyn stared at him in disbelief. "So what? We just let them kill him? We find where they're holding him, and we get him back by force. In 48 hours? Damien, they could have him anywhere, any warehouse, any building, any basement in the 5 boroughs. You'll never find him in time. I have people looking right now, every contact, every informant. Someone knows where, and if they don't? Evelyn's hands were shaking. If we run out of time and they start sending pieces of him back, what then? What? Damien's expression was carved from stone in desperation. Then I will burn every Calabrese holding to the ground until someone tells me where he is. That could take weeks. I don't care. Well, I care. Evelyn's voice broke completely. That's my father, the man who raised me, who's dying of cancer and doesn't deserve to spend his last months being tortured by mobsters because his daughter made the mistake of marrying you. The words hung in the air like poison. Damien flinched like she'd physically struck him. Evelyn immediately wanted to take it back, wanted to apologize. But the damage was already done, carved into the wounded look on his face before his expression went carefully blank. You're right, he said quietly. This is my fault. My war. My enemies. You never asked for any of this. Damien, I didn't mean... Get some sleep. We'll figure this out in the morning. He walked past her toward his office, shoulders rigid with the kind of tension that suggested he was barely holding himself together. Evelyn stood alone in the living room, hands trembling, tears burning tracks down her face. Everything was falling apart. Boss, she didn't sleep. Instead, she paced the bedroom while her mind ran through impossible scenarios, trading herself for her father, trying to negotiate, running away and hoping the Calabrese family would leave Damien alone if she disappeared. None of them ended well. At 6 in the morning, one of Damien's associates, a man named Vincent who looked like he strangled people for fun, knocked on the bedroom door. Mrs. Moretti, your presence is requested in Mr. Moretti's office. Evelyn followed him down the hallway, her stomach churning with dread. Damien's office was full of men she recognized from dinners and business meetings. They all stopped talking when she entered, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable to openly hostile. Damien sat behind his desk looking like he hadn't slept either. His shirt was different. He'd changed at some point, but his face still carried the same haunted exhaustion from last night. What's going on? Evelyn asked. Damien gestured to an empty chair. Sit. Something in his tone made alarm bells ring in her head. This wasn't her husband. This was the Mafia Boss addressing a problem. She sat slowly. We've received new intelligence about your father's location, Damien said, his voice carefully neutral. One of my informants claims the Calabrese family is holding him in a warehouse in Sunset Park. We're preparing an extraction team now. Relief flooded through her. That's good news, right? It would be, except the same informant also provided some additional information that I need you to explain. Ice flooded her veins. What kind of information? Damien slid a folder across the desk. Evelyn opened it with trembling hands. Inside were bank statements, wire transfers, photocopies of checks made out to an account she didn't recognize, all dated over the past 6 months, all signed by her father. What is this? Your father has been receiving payments from the Calabrese family since January, Damien said flatly, $20,000 a month, deposited into an offshore account that he thought was hidden well enough that my people wouldn't find it. The room tilted. No, that's not possible. The bank records don't lie, Evelyn. Then they're forged. Someone's trying to frame him. Vincent spoke up from his position by the door. We verified everything. The account was opened by your father personally. He's been withdrawing cash regularly. The timing matches up with debts he supposedly owed to loan sharks that never existed. Evelyn's hands started shaking so badly she dropped the folder. Papers scattered across the desk. You're saying my father has been working with the people who tried to kill me? I'm saying your father has been on the Calabrese payroll for 6 months, Damien corrected, his voice devoid of emotion. What that means exactly is something I need you to help me understand. I don't understand. None of this makes sense. Evelyn stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood. My father was dying. His casino went bankrupt. He had nothing. Why would the Calabrese family pay him? That's what I'm trying to figure out. One of the other men, Marco, the one from their first dinner together, cleared his throat. Permission to speak freely, boss? Damien nodded. The hit on Mrs. Moretti, The timing was very specific. They knew exactly where she'd be and when. We blamed Antonio for leaking the information, but what if it came from somewhere else? What if— Don't! Evelyn's voice was sharp as broken glass. Don't you dare suggest my father set me up to be killed. Marco spread his hands. I'm just saying the timeline is suspicious. He gets diagnosed with cancer. Suddenly he's drowning in debt. Then he makes a deal to marry you off to the boss. 3 weeks after the wedding, you get shot, he's still receiving payments, and now he's conveniently kidnapped, right when the boss is winning the war. Get out, Evelyn whispered. Mrs. Moretti? Get the fuck out before I find a gun and shoot you myself. The room erupted in tense silence. Marco looked to Damien for support. Damien's expression was unreadable. Everyone leave, now. The men filed out, Vincent closing the door behind them with a quiet click that sounded impossibly loud. Evelyn stood across the desk from Damien, her entire body trembling with rage and fear and devastating uncertainty. You think he did this, she said flatly. You think my father sold me out. I think the evidence suggests something extremely wrong is happening. But you don't know. These could be fabricated. Someone could be setting him up. Who? Damien's voice was maddeningly calm. Who benefits from making your father look guilty? The Calabrese family? They're already at war with me. They don't need to frame a dying man. Antonio? He's dead. Who else even knew about your father's financial situation before we got married? Evelyn's mind raced through possibilities and came up empty. I don't know, she admitted. But I know my father. He wouldn't do this. He couldn't. People do terrible things when they're desperate. He loves me. Maybe. Damien stood slowly, moving around the desk with the careful movements of someone approaching a wounded animal. Or maybe he loves himself more. Maybe the cancer diagnosis and the debt were real, but instead of accepting my help out of gratitude, he saw an opportunity, a way to clear his debts and make money on the side by feeding information to my enemies. Stop it. Maybe he never expected you to actually get hurt. Maybe he thought you'd be safe because you're my wife and no one would be stupid enough to try. But then the hit happened and suddenly he's in too deep. Suddenly he's complicit in attempted murder and the only way out is to let them take him so he can play the victim. Stop it! Or maybe Damien's voice dropped to something cold and clinical. Maybe he planned the whole thing from the beginning. Fake the kidnapping, let me pay the ransom, disappear with the money, and start over somewhere warm where cancer treatment is cheap and extradition is impossible. Evelyn slapped him. The crack of her palm against his face echoed through the office like a gunshot. Damien's head snapped to the side. A red mark bloomed across his cheek. He didn't move, didn't retaliate, just stood there absorbing the violence she needed to express. My father is not a monster, Evelyn said, voice shaking with fury. He's a good man who made bad business decisions and got sick at the worst possible time. He didn't sell me out. He didn't plan any of this. And if you can't see that, if you're so paranoid and broken that you think everyone is lying to you, then maybe Marco was right. Maybe you can't trust anyone, including me. She turned toward the door. Where are you going? To find someone who actually gives a damn about saving my father instead of building conspiracy theories. Evelyn yanked the door open and nearly collided with Vincent, who was standing guard outside looking extremely uncomfortable. Move. Mrs. Moretti, the boss said you need to stay in the penthouse. The boss can go fuck himself. She shoved past Vincent and headed for the elevator, ignoring the calls behind her. The lobby was full of security. They all looked at her with expressions that suggested they'd been given very specific orders not to let her leave. Get out of my way, Evelyn said quietly. The head of security, a man built like a tank named Leo, stepped forward. Ma'am, I can't let you leave without Mr. Moretti's authorization. I'm not asking permission. Mrs. Moretti, please be reasonable. She grabbed a decorative vase from the entry table and threw it at the elevator doors. It shattered spectacularly, porcelain exploding across marble floors. Everyone froze. The next thing I throw will be at someone's head, Evelyn said calmly. Now move. Leo's hand went to his earpiece, listening. His expression shifted from uncertain to resigned. Let her go. Damien's voice crackled through the radio. Don't follow her. Don't stop her. Let her go. The security team parted like a sea. Evelyn walked through them and out the front doors into Manhattan. Morning sunlight that felt impossibly bright and normal given that her entire world was imploding. She had no plan, no destination, no idea what she was going to do. But she knew she couldn't stay in that penthouse for another second, pretending everything was fine, while the two men she loved most destroyed each other over accusations and evidence that didn't make sense. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, then decided she had nothing left to lose. Hello? Mrs. Moretti? The voice was the same one from the video. Accented, calm, terrifying. I'm glad you decided to take a walk. We've been watching the building for days, hoping you'd give us an opening. This is perfect. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. How did you get this number? Your father gave it to us, along with quite a lot of other useful information. A pause. He really is a wealth of knowledge when properly motivated. If you hurt him, we haven't touched him beyond what was necessary to ensure his cooperation. We're not animals, Mrs. Moretti. We're businessmen. And business works better when everyone understands their role. Evelyn looked around wildly. The street was full of morning commuters, cars, pedestrians. Any one of them could be watching her. What do you want? The same thing we've always wanted. You, in exchange for your father's safe return. The voice took on an almost friendly tone. There's a black sedan parked 3 cars behind you. Get in. The driver will bring you to us. Once we confirm your cooperation, your father goes free. Simple transaction. And if I refuse? Then we start the live stream we promised. Though I should mention, your father's health has deteriorated significantly during his stay with us. The stress isn't good for his condition. I'd estimate he has maybe another 72 hours before the cancer kills him, regardless of what we do. So really, you'd just be letting him die alone and in pain for no reason. Evelyn's vision blurred with tears. How do I know you'll actually let him go? You don't. But you know for certain what happens if you refuse. At least this way, he has a chance. The logic was airtight and horrifying. I need to think. You have 30 seconds before the offer expires, and we move on to more persuasive methods. 29. 28. Evelyn's mind raced. She could run back to the building, call Damien, let him send his extraction team to the warehouse in Sunset Park. Except the warehouse was probably a trap, or empty, or full of explosives waiting to kill everyone Damien sent. And her father would still be dying somewhere while she hid behind armed guards and bulletproof glass. 15, 14, 13. She thought about the wedding, walking down that aisle in a dress that cost more than her father's entire medical bill, making a choice to save his life even though it meant marrying a stranger. This was the same choice, just with different stakes. 5, 4, 3. I'm getting in the car, Evelyn said quietly. Smart girl. We'll see you soon. The line went dead. Evelyn walked to the black sedan on shaking legs. The back door opened automatically. She took one last look at Manhattan, at the building where Damien was probably watching security footage and losing his mind, and made her choice. She got in the car. The door closed. The sedan pulled away from the curb and merged into traffic, carrying her toward whatever hell waited at the other end of this ride. Evelyn pulled out her phone with trembling hands and typed out a message to Damien. I'm sorry. I couldn't let them kill him. Whatever my father did or didn't do, he's still my father. I love you. Please don't come after me. This ends now. She hit send, then turned off her phone before he could respond. The driver didn't speak, didn't look at her, just drove through Manhattan like they were heading to a business meeting instead of a hostage exchange. Evelyn watched the city slide past the tinted windows and wondered if she'd just made the bravest decision of her life or the stupidest. Probably both. After 40 minutes, the sedan pulled into an industrial area in Queens that looked abandoned. Warehouses with broken windows, lots full of rusted shipping containers, the kind of neighborhood where screams wouldn't attract attention because everyone minded their own business. The car stopped in front of a building that might have been a factory once. The driver finally spoke. Get out! Evelyn opened the door on legs that barely supported her weight. 2 men waited outside, both armed, both watching her with the kind of professional assessment that suggested they'd done this before. Hands where we can see them, one of them ordered. She raised her hands slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. They patted her down efficiently, finding her phone and taking it. One of them crushed it under his boot while the other opened the factory door. Inside, the factory interior was exactly as depressing as expected. Concrete floors stained with things she didn't want to identify. Exposed pipes running along the ceiling, the smell of rust and mildew and old fear. And in the center of the space, tied to a chair with duct tape across his mouth, was her father. He looked worse than in the video. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor that suggested his body was actively shutting down. The oxygen tank sat beside him, but the tubes weren't in his nose anymore. His eyes were wide and terrified when he saw her. He was trying to scream something through the tape, probably telling her to run. Too late for that. A man stepped out of the shadows, older, well-dressed, with the kind of casual authority that marked him as someone important. Not the muscle, the brain. "Mrs. Moretti, thank you for coming. I'm Giovanni Calabrese." He smiled like they were meeting at a cocktail party. "I'd offer you a drink, but I'm afraid we're a bit short on hospitality in our current accommodations." Evelyn ignored him and ran to her father, dropping to her knees beside his chair. Dad, I'm here, it's okay. I'm going to get you out." "Actually, you're not." Giovanni's voice stopped her cold. She turned slowly to look at him. "We had a deal," she said. "I'm here. Now let him go." "Ah, yes, the deal." Giovanni pulled out a gun, casual as pulling out a wallet. "Here's the thing about deals with people like us, Mrs. Moretti. They're only as good as the leverage behind them, and right now we have all the leverage we need." Ice flooded through her veins. "You're not letting him go." "Of course not. He's far too valuable." Giovanni gestured to her father with the gun. "Did you know he's been working for us for 8 months? Feeding us information about your husband's operations, helping us identify weaknesses, setting up opportunities for us to strike." The words hit her like bullets. No, that couldn't be true. She looked at her father. His eyes were swimming with tears, but he wasn't denying it, wasn't shaking his head, just staring at her with an expression that screamed guilt and shame and desperation. "You're lying," Evelyn whispered. "The bank records don't lie. The wire transfers don't lie. And most importantly," Giovanni crouched down to her eye level, "your father's confession 3 hours ago didn't lie. He told us everything, how he approached us first, looking for money to cover his gambling debts, how the cancer diagnosis gave him the perfect cover story, how he suggested marrying you off to Moretti to gain access to his organization, how he's been reporting back to us ever since." Evelyn couldn't breathe. Her father made a muffled sound through the tape, tears streaming down his face. "The hit on you was unfortunate," Giovanni continued conversationally. "That wasn't supposed to happen. We just wanted to send a message to your husband, scare him a bit. But our soldiers got overzealous and, well," he shrugged, "mistakes happen." "You're a monster," Evelyn managed. "I'm a businessman. Your father is the monster. He sold his own daughter for gambling money and cancer treatment." Giovanni stood, brushing invisible dust off his pants. "Though I suppose we're all monsters in the end. It's just a matter of degree." One of the armed guards stepped forward. "Boss, we need to move. Moretti's people could track her phone before we destroyed it." Giovanni nodded. "Right. Time to wrap this up." He raised the gun. Evelyn lunged forward on instinct, throwing herself between Giovanni and her father. "Wait, please, you have me now. You can use me against Damien. I'm worth more alive than—" "Actually, you're worth far more dead." Giovanni's smile was colder than winter. "See, keeping you alive means managing you, feeding you, dealing with rescue attempts. But if we kill you and send your body back to your husband piece by piece, that sends a much clearer message. That breaks him completely. A broken Damien Moretti is much easier to destroy than an angry one." He aimed the gun at her head. Evelyn closed her eyes. This was it. This was how her story ended. In a factory in Queens, betrayed by her father, dying to prove a point to the man she loved. At least Damien would know she'd tried. The gunshot shattered the silence, but Evelyn didn't feel the impact. She opened her eyes in time to see Giovanni stumble backward, blood blooming across his chest. What the hell? More gunshots. Rapid fire. Professional. The armed guards dropped like puppets with cut strings. Then Damien stepped out of the shadows behind a stack of shipping containers, gun raised, eyes blazing with fury that could have burned the world down. He wasn't alone. Vincent, Leo, James, at least a dozen more of his people, all armed, all moving with the deadly precision of soldiers clearing a hostile space. "Evelyn, get down!" Damien roared. She dropped to the concrete, covering her head as bullets screamed through the air above her. The firefight lasted maybe 30 seconds. When silence finally fell, every Calabrese soldier in the building was dead or dying. Damien crossed to her in 3 long strides, dropping to his knees and pulling her into his arms with enough force to knock the air from her lungs. "You stupid, reckless, impossible woman," he growled against her hair. "What the fuck were you thinking?" Evelyn was shaking too hard to answer. Damien pulled back just enough to check her for injuries, hands running over her arms and shoulders with frantic efficiency. "I'm okay," she managed. "I'm not hit. You turned off your phone. You got in a car with people who want you dead. You walked into an obvious trap without backup." His voice cracked. "You could have died." "I had to save my father." Something flickered across Damien's expression. Not anger, something worse. Grief. He helped her to her feet and turned her gently toward where her father still sat tied to the chair. Vincent was cutting the tape away, but her father wasn't moving. His eyes stared at nothing. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. One of the stray bullets had caught him in the chest. "No!" Evelyn stumbled forward. "No, no, no! Dad!" She dropped beside him, hands hovering uselessly over the wound that was pumping blood with every heartbeat. Her father's eyes focused on her with visible effort. He tried to speak. Blood bubbled at his lips. "Don't talk," Evelyn begged. "We'll get you help. We'll—" His hand found hers, squeezed weakly, then he was gone. Just like that. No dramatic last words, no apologies, no explanations. Just gone. Evelyn heard herself screaming from very far away, felt Damien's arms wrap around her, pulling her away from the body, felt herself collapse against his chest while the world shattered into pieces that would never fit back together quite right. Her father was dead, and the last thing she'd learned about him was that he'd sold her out for money. Everything she'd believed, everything she'd trusted, every memory from her childhood, all of it poisoned now by the knowledge that the man who'd raised her had traded her life for cash and cancer treatment. Damien held her while she fell apart, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other wrapped around her waist like he could physically hold her together through the force of will alone. "I've got you," he whispered. "I've got you. You're safe now." But she wasn't safe. She would never be safe again. Because now she knew the truth. In this world, Damien's world, the world she'd married into and accepted and learned to navigate, everyone was a potential threat. Everyone had a price. Even the people you loved most. Even family. Us. Evelyn didn't speak for 3 days. She moved through the penthouse like a ghost, eating when Damien put food in front of her, sleeping when exhaustion finally dragged her under, existing in a state of numb detachment that terrified him more than any bullet ever had. Her father's body had been cremated quietly. No funeral, no service, no mourning period for a man who'd sold out his own daughter for money. The ashes sat in an urn on the mantel because Evelyn couldn't decide what else to do with them. Damien watched her fracture in real time and felt completely helpless to stop it. On the 4th day, she finally broke the silence. "I want them all dead." Her voice was flat, empty, nothing like the woman who'd challenged him in his office, who'd thrown vases at security guards, who'd kissed him like he was oxygen and she was drowning. Damien looked up from the reports he'd been pretending to read. Evelyn stood by the windows overlooking Manhattan, still wearing the same clothes from yesterday, her hair tangled and her eyes hollow. "The Calabrese family?" he asked carefully. "Everyone." She turned to face him, and the expression on her face made his blood run cold. "Everyone who knew what my father was doing, everyone who paid him, everyone who used him to get to you, I want them erased from existence." "Evelyn? You told me once that you'd burn the city to ashes if something happened to me." Her voice was steady now, sharp as broken glass. "Well, something happened. They killed my father. They poisoned every memory I have of him. They took the one person I thought I could trust and turned him into a traitor who sold me for gambling debts." She crossed to where Damien sat, her movements controlled and deliberate. So I'm asking you to keep your promise. Burn them down, all of them. Don't leave anyone alive to tell the story. Damien stood slowly, studying her face, looking for the woman he'd fallen in love with beneath the rage and grief and devastation. He found her, buried deep, but still there. If I do this, he said quietly, there's no coming back from it. This won't be surgical strikes and strategic removals. This will be total war. People will die. Innocent people caught in the crossfire. The city will turn into a battlefield. I don't care. You will. Eventually. When the dust settles and you see what we've done. He reached out, cupping her face with both hands. I need you to be sure. Because once I start this, I can't stop it halfway. It's all or nothing. Evelyn's eyes burned with something that looked dangerously close to madness. I'm sure. Burn it all down. Damien searched her face for another beat, then nodded slowly. Okay, then we do it together. The planning took 6 hours. Damien's entire network mobilized. Every associate, every soldier, every contact who owed him favors. The operation was comprehensive and brutal. Simultaneous strikes on every Calabrese holding across all 5 boroughs. Evelyn sat in on every meeting, learned the names of targets, memorized the locations, listened to men discuss violence with the clinical detachment of surgeons planning operations. Vincent raised concerns about civilian casualties. The restaurant in Little Italy, it's a legitimate business. There'll be customers, staff, people who have nothing to do with the family. Then we wait until closing time, Damien said without looking up from the maps spread across his desk. Strike at 3 a.m., when the only people there are the ones who know exactly what they're part of. And the residential buildings? The Calabrese underboss has a penthouse in Midtown, 20 floors of innocent people living beneath him. We extract him first. Take him somewhere private. The building stays standing. Marco leaned forward. Boss, with all due respect, this is a lot of exposure, a lot of moving parts. One mistake and the feds will be all over us. Then don't make mistakes. The meetings continued late into the night. Coffee turned to whiskey. Whiskey turned to exhaustion that everyone ignored because stopping meant thinking about what they were actually planning. Evelyn absorbed it all with the focus of someone memorizing prayers. The targets. The timing. The extraction points. The contingencies if things went wrong. She was going to be part of this. Damien had tried to argue, tried to convince her to stay at the penthouse where it was safe. She'd pulled out a gun, one of his backups from the safe in his office, and demonstrated that Patricia had been teaching her to shoot during her recovery. The argument ended there. Now she sat cleaning the weapon with practiced efficiency while men twice her age discussed the logistics of dismantling a criminal empire. The main compound is the problem, Vincent said, pointing to a location in Staten Island. It's fortified, cameras everywhere, armed guards rotating in shifts. They'll see us coming from a mile away. Then we don't hide. Damien's voice was cold and certain. We walk right up to the front door and announce ourselves. Everyone stared at him. That's suicide, Marco said flatly. That's psychological warfare. Damien stood, moving to the map. By the time we hit the compound, they'll have heard about every other location we've destroyed. Their soldiers will be scattered. Their leadership will be panicking. They'll be expecting us to skulk in the shadows. He tapped the compound location with one finger. So we show up in broad daylight with enough firepower to level the building, and we give them one chance to surrender peacefully. When they refuse, because they will refuse, we demonstrate exactly what happens when you fuck with my family. The room fell silent. Evelyn looked up from the gun she'd been cleaning. When do we start? Damien's eyes met hers across the room. Dark, determined, devastated by what they were about to do, but committed to seeing it through. Tomorrow night, we hit everything at once. By sunrise, the Calabrese family will be a memory. The first strike happened at midnight, a warehouse in Red Hook that processed their drug shipments. Damien's team moved through it like shadows, clearing guards with silenced weapons before planting enough explosives to send the building into the East River. The blast lit up the waterfront like a second sun. Evelyn watched from the car 2 blocks away, feeling nothing as the shockwave rattled windows and set off car alarms for half a mile. "One down," Vincent reported through the radio. "No civilian casualties. Moving to Target 2. Target 2 was a gambling operation in Chinatown, hidden beneath a legitimate restaurant. They waited until the last customer left at 2 a.m., then walked in through the kitchen with guns drawn. The 7 men running the operation were given 30 seconds to surrender. 5 of them tried to fight. None of them survived. Evelyn stood in the doorway, watching Damien's soldiers drag bodies out the back entrance, while others wiped down surfaces and collected shell casings with the efficiency of people who'd done this before. She should feel something: horror, guilt, remorse. She felt nothing but grim satisfaction that the number was increasing. "You okay?" Damien appeared beside her, gun still in his hand, a spray of blood across his white shirt that wasn't his. "Fine." He studied her face like he was looking for cracks. "You don't have to watch this part. You can wait in the car." "I need to see it." Her voice was steady, certain. "I need to know it's real, that they're actually gone." Damien's expression shifted into something that might have been concern if he had energy left for emotions that soft. "Let's move. 3 more locations before we hit the compound." They worked through the night like angels of death cleaning up the city. A chop shop in the Bronx, a money laundering front in Queens, a safe house in Harlem where 3 ranking soldiers were sleeping when Damien's team breached the doors. By 5 a.m., every Calabrese operation in New York had been either destroyed or compromised beyond repair. The compound was all that remained. They regrouped at a warehouse Damien owned in Brooklyn. His soldiers looked exhausted but wired on adrenaline, checking weapons and reloading magazines with hands that shook slightly from fatigue and violence. Evelyn sat on a crate in the corner, her gun in her lap, watching the organized chaos around her. Vincent approached carefully. "Mrs. Moretti, you should know the compound won't be like the other locations. There'll be a lot of armed resistance. It's going to get messy." "Good." He blinked. "I'm sorry?" "I said good. I hope they fight. I hope every single one of them tries to defend that building so there's no question about what happens next." Vincent looked genuinely disturbed. He glanced at Damien, who was across the warehouse coordinating final logistics. "She's committed," Vincent said quietly when Damien came over. "Maybe too committed. Are you sure bringing her to the compound is a good idea?" "I'm right here," Evelyn said sharply. "You can ask me directly instead of talking about me like I'm not in the room." Vincent had the grace to look embarrassed. "Fair point. Mrs. Moretti, are you sure you want to be there for the final assault? No judgment, if you'd rather." "I'm sure." She stood, checking her gun one more time. "My father died because of the people in that compound. I'm going to watch them pay for it." She walked away before either man could argue. Damien watched her go with an expression that suggested he was watching someone he loved slip away into darkness and couldn't figure out how to pull them back. "She's not going to survive this mentally," Vincent said quietly. "Even if she survives physically, what she's becoming, I know." Damien's voice was rough. "But she asked me to do this, and I love her too much to deny her the closure she needs, even if it destroys us both." Dawn broke over Staten Island in shades of gold and crimson. The Calabrese compound sat on 5 acres of waterfront property, hidden behind walls and gates that screamed old money and older crimes. The main house was a mansion that would have looked elegant in better circumstances. Now it just looked like a target. Damien's convoy pulled up to the front gates at 6:30 a.m., 8 vehicles, 40 soldiers, enough weapons to start a small war, which was exactly what they were about to do. Evelyn sat in the lead car beside Damien, her gun loaded and her hands steady, despite the fact that her heart was trying to hammer its way out of her chest. "Last chance," Damien said quietly. "You can stay in the car. Stay safe. Let me handle this." "No." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Stay close to me. Don't take unnecessary risks. If shooting starts, get behind cover immediately." "I know what to do." The gates were locked. Damien's driver didn't slow down. The reinforced SUV smashed through wrought iron like it was tissue paper, alarms immediately screaming to life across the property. Guards appeared on the mansion's roof. Others poured out of the front doors with weapons raised. Damien stepped out of the car into the dawn light, looking like death incarnate. His soldiers fanned out behind him in a formation that suggested military training and zero hesitation about using it. A man emerged from the mansion, older, well-dressed, with the kind of authority that marked him as important. Not the boss. Giovanni had died in that Queen's factory, but someone high enough in the hierarchy to make decisions. Damien Moretti, the man's voice carried across the lawn. You're either very brave or very stupid coming here. Neither. I'm thorough. Damien's voice was calm, conversational, the kind of calm that preceded hurricanes. I'm giving you one opportunity to surrender peacefully. Lay down your weapons, walk away, find new employment. I'll even let you keep your lives. The man laughed. You've destroyed everything we built, killed our soldiers, burned our operations, and now you want us to just walk away? Yes. And if we refuse? Damien smiled. It was the coldest expression Evelyn had ever seen on a human face. Then I demonstrate why no one in this city fucks with my family and lives to tell the story. The man on the mansion steps considered this, then slowly reached for his weapon. Wrong choice, Damien said quietly. Everything exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from both sides. Evelyn dropped behind the SUV, her heart racing as bullets punched through metal and shattered glass above her head. Damien was beside her instantly, returning fire with precise shots that dropped guards with terrifying efficiency. Stay down! He roared over the noise. Evelyn ignored him. She leaned around the SUV and fired at a guard trying to flank their position. Her first shot went wide. The second caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. The third hit center mass. He dropped. Evelyn felt nothing. The firefight lasted 10 minutes that felt like hours. Damien's soldiers advanced methodically, using cover and suppressing fire to push toward the mansion, while Calabrese guards fell back in disorganized chaos. Vincent appeared beside them, breathing hard. East Wing is clear. We're pushing through to the main house. Casualties? Damien demanded. 3 wounded. Nothing fatal. They have more bodies than us, but less training. We're winning. More gunshots. Closer now. A guard appeared on the second-floor balcony with a rifle. Evelyn saw him lining up a shot at Damien's back. She didn't think, just raised her gun and fired 3 times in rapid succession. The guard pitched forward over the railing and hit the lawn with a wet crunch. Damien turned to stare at her. Nice shot. Don't sound so surprised. They advanced toward the mansion while his soldiers cleared the grounds. Bodies littered the perfectly manicured lawn. Blood soaked into expensive landscaping. The mansion's elegant facade was pockmarked with bullet holes that would never be repaired. The front doors hung open. Damien's team had already breached. Inside was chaos. Shouting, gunfire, the smell of cordite and blood. Evelyn followed Damien through rooms that looked like they belonged in architectural magazines. Marble floors, original artwork, furniture that cost more than cars. All of it being destroyed in real time as soldiers fought room to room. They found the last of the Calabrese leadership in a study on the second floor. 4 men huddled behind an overturned desk, firing blindly at the doorway. Damien's soldiers had them pinned but couldn't advance without taking casualties. Grenades? Vincent suggested. No, I want them alive. Damien's voice was ice. I want them to understand exactly what they've lost. He stepped into the doorway, completely exposed, and the shooting stopped. Everyone stared at him. You have 10 seconds to surrender, Damien said calmly. After that, I stopped being merciful. One of the men behind the desk tried to raise his weapon. Damien shot him through the head before he could even aim properly. The body collapsed. Blood sprayed across expensive wood paneling. 9 seconds. The remaining 3 threw down their weapons so fast they nearly injured themselves doing it. Damien's soldiers moved in, zip-tying hands and dragging the men to their knees in the center of the study. Evelyn stepped into the room, her gun still in her hand, blood splattered across her clothes from violence she couldn't even remember committing. The 3 men looked up at her with expressions ranging from defiant to terrified. Damien moved to stand beside her. Gentlemen, meet my wife. The woman your organization tried to kill. The woman whose father your family corrupted and destroyed. The woman who asked me very specifically to make sure none of you survived this. One of the men, younger, maybe 30, tried to speak. Please, we didn't know, we were just following orders. I don't care. Evelyn's voice was flat, empty. You chose this life. You chose to work for people who murder and extort and destroy families. You don't get to beg for mercy now that you've lost. She raised her gun. Damien's hand came up, gently redirecting her aim toward the floor. Not like this. Evelyn turned to look at him, rage and grief warring in her expression. Why not? They deserve it. They do. But you don't deserve what killing them will do to you. His voice was soft, certain. Trust me, I've killed enough people to know. It changes you, hardens you, takes pieces of yourself you can't get back. And I love you too much to watch you lose more of yourself than you already have. Tears burned in Evelyn's eyes for the first time since her father died. I need them gone. I know, and they will be. I promise you that. He gently took the gun from her shaking hands. But I'll carry that weight, not you. He turned to the three men kneeling on the floor. You're going to disappear, Damien said quietly. Not dead. Worse. You're going to spend the rest of your lives in places where no one will ever find you, where every day you'll remember that you destroyed a young woman's life and paid the price for it, where you'll have nothing but time to regret the choices that brought you here. He nodded to Vincent. Take them. The usual protocols. Vincent's expression suggested usual protocols involved things that would make hell look appealing by comparison. The three men were dragged away screaming promises and threats that no one listened to. The mansion fell quiet. Evelyn stood in the study surrounded by bodies and blood and the ruins of an empire, feeling completely hollowed out. Damien pulled her into his arms, and she collapsed against his chest while Manhattan burned across the water in the distance, sirens wailing as emergency services responded to a dozen fires and crime scenes scattered across 5 boroughs. It's over, he whispered against her hair. It's done. They're gone. All of them. Evelyn pressed her face against his blood-stained shirt and finally let herself cry. Not for her father, not for the men who died, not for the innocence she'd lost somewhere between that wedding and this moment, but for the woman she used to be. The one who'd walked down that aisle terrified of the man at the altar. The one who'd thought marriage to a mafia boss would be her prison. The one who hadn't understood that love could be both salvation and damnation wrapped in the same violent package. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone harder, colder. Someone who'd watched men die and felt nothing but satisfaction. Someone who'd become exactly what this world required to survive. Damien held her while she shattered and reformed into something new. His hands gentle, despite the violence they'd just committed. His voice soft, despite the orders he'd given that had ended lives. Outside, the sun climbed higher over New York, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. The war was over. The Calabrese family had been erased from existence, and Damien Moretti stood victorious in the ruins of his enemy's empire, with the woman he loved trembling in his arms. But victory tasted like ash and blood, and losses that could never be recovered. They stood there in the destroyed study while his soldiers secured the compound and called in cleaning crews to dispose of evidence that would never see a courtroom. Evelyn finally pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing blood across her face without noticing. What happens now? She asked hoarsely. Damien looked at her with eyes that had seen too much and loved too deeply. Now we go home. We bury the dead. We rebuild. We try to remember who we were before all this. And if we can't remember, then we figure out who we are now. He cupped her face with hands that had just held guns, his touch infinitely gentle. Together. Evelyn nodded slowly. Together. They walked out of the mansion hand in hand, leaving behind bodies and blood and the smoking remains of a criminal empire. The convoy was waiting, soldiers loading up, wounded being tended, the organized chaos of a military operation winding down. Evelyn climbed into the SUV with Damien, her gun still in her lap, her clothes stained with violence she'd participated in. The drive back to Manhattan was quiet. Everyone was too exhausted for celebration, too aware of what they'd just done to feel anything but grim relief that it was over. The penthouse felt different when they finally walked through the doors, quieter, emptier, like even the walls knew something fundamental had shifted. Damien headed straight for the bar, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey and handing one to Evelyn. They stood by the windows overlooking the city they'd just torn apart and rebuilt in the span of one blood-soaked night. I love you, Evelyn said quietly. Damien turned to look at her, surprise flickering across his exhausted features. Even after everything? He asked. Even knowing what I'm capable of? What we just did? Especially after everything. She took a sip of whiskey, the burn grounding her in reality. You kept your promise. You burned it all down for me, You let me be part of it even though it terrified you. You protected me even when I was trying to destroy myself. She set down the glass and moved closer, taking his face in her hands. You're a monster, she whispered. But you're my monster, and I'm yours, whatever that makes us. Damien's eyes went suspiciously bright. He pulled her into a kiss that tasted like whiskey and blood and promises neither of them knew if they could keep. When they finally broke apart, dawn was fully risen over Manhattan, painting everything in harsh light that revealed all the damage they couldn't hide anymore. Marry me again, Damien said suddenly. Evelyn blinked. What? Marry me again. A real wedding this time. Not a transaction. Not a business deal. Just you and me choosing each other because we want to. Because we love each other despite everything we've become. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. We're already married. Not the way I want. Not the way you deserve. He dropped to one knee right there in the blood-stained clothes from the compound, looking up at her with eyes that held entire universes of devotion and desperation. Evelyn Hart Moretti. Will you marry me again? Not because your father's debt demanded it, not because circumstances forced you, but because you actually want to spend the rest of your life with me? Evelyn stared down at him, this impossible, dangerous, devoted man who'd destroyed an empire for her and was now asking for something as simple and profound as her choice. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you again. Damien surged to his feet and kissed her hard enough to bruise, spinning her around in the morning light while Manhattan woke up below them, completely unaware that its criminal underworld had been rewritten overnight. When he finally set her down, they were both crying and laughing and holding each other like anchors in a storm that had finally passed. I have something to tell you, Evelyn said breathlessly. What? She took his hand and pressed it against her stomach, her eyes never leaving his. I'm pregnant. Damien's expression went through about 6 different emotions in 3 seconds before settling on something that looked like pure terrified joy. You're... His voice cracked. How long have you known? 2 weeks. I found out right before... She stopped, not wanting to mention her father. I found out 2 weeks ago. I was waiting for the right time to tell you. And you think now is the right time after we just... He gestured vaguely at themselves, at the blood on their clothes, at the violence they'd committed. I think there's never going to be a perfect time. Not in our world. Not with our lives. She squeezed his hand. But I wanted you to know that everything we just did, it wasn't just for revenge. It was to make this city safe enough for our child to grow up in without constantly looking over their shoulder. Damien dropped to his knees for the second time that morning, pressing his forehead against her stomach with hands that shook. I'm going to be a father, he whispered. You're going to be an amazing father. He looked up at her with eyes swimming in tears. I've killed people, Evelyn. So many people. I've destroyed lives and ruined families and built an empire on blood. How am I supposed to raise a child? The same way every parent does. One day at a time. Making mistakes and learning from them. Loving them more than we thought possible. She ran her fingers through his hair. And this time, you won't be doing it alone. You'll have me. We'll figure it out together. Damien stood slowly, pulling her into his arms with a gentleness that contradicted everything he'd done in the past 12 hours. I need to change everything, he said quietly. The business, the organization, all of it. I can't raise a child in this world. I won't let them grow up surrounded by violence and fear. Then we change it, together. They stood there in the morning light, blood-stained and exhausted and terrified of the future, but holding on to each other like they were all that mattered. Because maybe they were. Maybe love and family and choosing each other every single day was enough to build something better than the empire Damien had inherited. Maybe they could actually have a future that didn't end in bullets and blood. Maybe. Outside, Manhattan continued its eternal rhythm, completely indifferent to the 2 people standing in a penthouse trying to figure out how to be human again after becoming monsters. The war was over. The real work was just beginning. All set. The cleanup took weeks. Federal investigators swarmed the city asking questions nobody answered. Bodies were identified and buried quietly. Buildings were demolished or sold. Evidence disappeared into rivers and incinerators and places where sunlight never reached. Damien's lawyers worked overtime making sure nothing traced back to him directly. Money changed hands. Witnesses developed sudden amnesia. Security footage, mysteriously corrupted. By the end of the month, the official story was gang violence between rival organizations that had destroyed each other in a turf war. Tragic. Inevitable. Nothing to do with respected businessman Damien Moretti, who owned legitimate security firms and investment companies and sat on charity boards. The unofficial story, the one whispered in the corners of New York's underworld, was that Damien Moretti had become untouchable, that crossing him meant extinction, that the Calabrese family had learned that lesson too late and paid for it with everything they'd built. Evelyn watched it all unfold from the penthouse, her stomach growing rounder while the city forgot how much blood had soaked into its streets. She attended exactly one meeting with the lawyers. They'd laid out paperwork detailing shell corporations and offshore accounts and legal structures designed to insulate Damien from prosecution, explained how money could be moved and cleaned and legitimized through enough layers that it became impossible to trace. Evelyn had listened quietly, then asked a single question. How long until he's completely out? The lead lawyer, a woman in her 50s who probably charged more per hour than most people earned in a week, had looked uncomfortable. Out of what, Mrs. Moretti? All of it. The criminal operations, the illegal income, everything that could get him arrested or killed or taken away from his family. Silence had dropped over the conference room. The lawyer had glanced at Damien, who'd been watching Evelyn with an unreadable expression. That's complicated, the lawyer said carefully. Mr. Moretti's business interests are deeply interconnected. Extracting completely would take years, maybe longer, and it would mean walking away from substantial income streams that currently fund. I don't care about the money. Evelyn's voice had been steady, final. I care about my husband being alive to meet his daughter. I care about not raising a child who has to wonder if daddy's going to prison or getting shot every time he leaves the house. So I'll ask again. How long? The lawyer had looked at Damien again. He'd leaned forward, elbows on the conference table, and spoken in a voice that carried absolute authority. Make it happen, however long it takes, whatever it costs. I want to be completely legitimate within 2 years. No criminal operations, no illegal income, nothing that puts my family at risk. Can you do that? The lawyer had swallowed hard. It's going to be expensive and difficult, and some of your associates won't be happy about losing their revenue streams. Then they can find new employment. Damien's expression had been carved from granite. I'm done with this life. Start the process today. That had been 6 weeks ago. Now Evelyn sat in the library reading a book about pregnancy and childbirth while Damien met with the 100th lawyer or accountant or business consultant trying to untangle an empire built on blood and turn it into something their daughter could be proud of. Her phone buzzed. A text from Margaret, the housekeeper. Mr. Moretti asked if you'd join him for lunch on the terrace. Evelyn set down the book and made her way through the penthouse, her hand unconsciously resting on her stomach where their daughter was currently practicing kickboxing against her internal organs. The terrace had been transformed since the war ended. Damien had hired landscape designers to fill it with plants and flowers and small trees that created the illusion of a garden floating above Manhattan. A table sat in the center with lunch already laid out, sandwiches and fruit and sparkling water because alcohol made her nauseous now. Damien stood by the railing overlooking the city, still wearing his suit from whatever meeting he'd just finished. He turned when he heard her approach, and his entire expression softened in a way that still made her breath catch. You look beautiful, he said. Evelyn glanced down at herself. Yoga pants and one of his oversized shirts because nothing else fit anymore. Hair pulled back in a messy bun. No makeup. She felt about as far from beautiful as possible. You're a terrible liar. I'm an excellent liar. Which is how you know I'm telling the truth right now. He crossed to her, hands settling on her hips, pulling her close enough to kiss her forehead. You're glowing, radiant. All those cliches pregnant women hate hearing that happen to be completely accurate. Evelyn rolled her eyes but couldn't help smiling. What did the lawyer say? Damien's expression shifted slightly, not quite worried, more like carefully optimistic. We're making progress. 3 more operations shut down this week. The income from legitimate businesses is starting to exceed the illegal streams. At this rate, we'll be completely clean in 18 months instead of 2 years. That's good. It's terrifying. He guided her to the table, pulling out her chair before sitting across from her. I've been doing this since I was 18. 22 years of knowing exactly how to navigate my world. And now I'm walking away from all of it to become what? A boring businessman who goes to board meetings and plays golf? Evelyn took a bite of her sandwich, studying his face. You're scared, terrified. What if I'm no good at being normal? What if I can't function without the violence and the power and the fear? Then you figure it out, same way everyone else does. She reached across the table to take his hand. You're not just walking away from your old life, Damien. You're walking toward a new one. With me. With our daughter. With a future that doesn't involve looking over your shoulder constantly. I know. Logically, I know that. His fingers tightened around hers. But there's a part of me that keeps waiting for the other shoe to drop. For someone to come out of nowhere and try to finish what the Calabrese family started. Is there anyone left who would try? Damien was quiet for a long moment. No. Everyone who had reason to hate me is either dead or too scared to act on it. We won, completely, decisively. There's no one left to fight. Then why do you still look like you're preparing for war? He met her eyes across the table, and the vulnerability in his expression made her chest ache. Because I don't know how to do anything else. Evelyn stood slowly, moving around the table to settle in his lap. The position was awkward now with her stomach in the way, but Damien adjusted immediately, his arms coming around her with practiced ease. Then let me teach you, she said quietly, how to be at peace, how to just exist without constantly planning the next move, how to be a husband and father instead of a boss and soldier. You make it sound easy. It's not. It's probably going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. She cupped his face, forcing him to look at her. But I'll be right here. Every step, every mistake, every moment you forget how to be normal, I'll remind you. Deal? Damien's eyes went suspiciously bright. Deal. He kissed her like she was oxygen, and he'd been drowning, one hand cradling the back of her head while the other rested protectively over their daughter. When they finally broke apart, Manhattan sprawled below them in the afternoon sunlight, indifferent and eternal. I have something for you, Damien said suddenly. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box that made Evelyn's heart skip. If this is a gun, I'm going to be very disappointed, she said. He laughed, a genuine sound that still surprised her every time she heard it. Not a gun. He opened the box to reveal a ring that stole her breath. Not a massive diamond, not ostentatious wealth designed to impress. Just a simple platinum band with 3 small emeralds set into the metal. Her birthstone, she realized with a jolt. It's an engagement ring, Damien explained, suddenly looking nervous in a way she'd never seen before. I know we're already married. I know I already gave you a wedding ring, but that ring was part of a transaction, a business deal. I want you to have something that represents us choosing each other. Actually choosing, not being forced by circumstances. He took the ring out of the box with slightly shaking hands. So this is me asking again. Properly this time. Evelyn Hart Moretti, will you marry me? Not because your father owed me, not because I could save his life, but because you actually want to spend forever with a man who spent half his life being a monster and is trying very hard to become someone worthy of you? Evelyn was crying before he finished talking. You're already worthy of me, you idiot. You've always been worthy. Even when I was terrified of you, even when I thought you were going to be my prison, you were still the most honest person in my life. Is that a yes? It's a hell yes. Damien slipped the ring onto her finger, right hand, because her left still wore the original wedding band. The emeralds caught the sunlight and threw green fire across the terrace. The wedding is in 2 months, he said. Small, private. Just the people who actually matter to us. No business associates. No politicians. No performing for an audience. Just you and me and the people we love. Your mother would have loved that, Evelyn said softly. Damien's expression flickered with old grief. She would have loved you, would have lectured me for hours about being good to you and not screwing this up. Then don't screw it up. I'll try my best. They sat together on the terrace for hours, talking about everything and nothing. Baby names and nursery colors and whether they should buy a house in the suburbs with a yard. Damien's plans to transform his security companies into legitimate operations that protected businesses instead of running them. Evelyn's idea about starting a foundation in her father's name, not to honor what he'd become, but to help families drowning in medical debt avoid making the same desperate choices. The sun tracked across the sky, painting Manhattan in shades of amber and gold. Margaret brought dinner to the terrace, something light and healthy that didn't make Evelyn's stomach revolt. They ate while the city lights began winking on below, transforming the view into a constellation of human ambition and dreams. "I'm scared," Evelyn admitted as they finished eating, "about being a mother, about raising a child in this world, even a safer version of it, about screwing her up the way my father screwed me up." "You won't. You don't know that." "I do." Damien's voice was certain. "Because you're already thinking about how not to hurt her, already planning how to give her a better life than you had. That self-awareness alone makes you leagues ahead of most parents." "And what about you? Are you scared?" "Absolutely terrified." He reached across the table to take her hand again. "I have no idea how to be a father. My own died when I was 16, and before that he was teaching me how to run numbers and break kneecaps. I don't have a roadmap for raising a daughter in a normal, healthy way." "Then we'll figure it out together. Make mistakes together. Learn together." Evelyn squeezed his fingers. "That's what partnership means, right? Neither of us has to be perfect. We just have to be trying." "When did you get so wise?" "Probably around the time I watched my husband dismantle a criminal empire and decided I wanted to help him build something better instead." They cleared the table together, moving through the penthouse with the comfortable rhythm of people who'd learned to exist in each other's space. Damien washed dishes while Evelyn dried, and the domesticity of it would have seemed absurd 6 months ago, but now felt perfectly natural. Later, they lay in bed with Evelyn's head on Damien's chest, his hand resting on her stomach, feeling their daughter kick and turn. "She's going to be trouble," Damien murmured. "I can already tell. She's your daughter. Of course she's going to be trouble." "Our daughter, which means she'll be beautiful and fierce and absolutely terrifying to anyone who crosses her." Evelyn smiled against his skin. "Sounds perfect." They fell asleep tangled together while Manhattan hummed beyond the bulletproof windows that would soon be replaced with regular glass because they didn't need that level of protection anymore. The war was over. The monsters had been slain. And in their place, 2 people were learning how to be human again. Hook. The second wedding happened on a rooftop garden in early autumn. Evelyn wore a cream-colored dress that accommodated her very pregnant stomach and made her look like something from a Renaissance painting. Her hair was down in soft waves because Damien had mentioned once that he loved it that way. No veil this time. No forced march down an aisle. No cameras or business associates or performing for an audience. Just 40 people who actually mattered sitting in chairs surrounded by flowers while Manhattan sprawled golden and beautiful below. Damien waited at the altar in a black suit, watching her approach with eyes that held entire universes of devotion. No cold assessment this time. No predatory evaluation, just pure love and anticipation and barely contained emotion. When Evelyn reached him, he took both her hands and smiled with the kind of joy that transformed his entire face. "You're late," he whispered. "I'm pregnant. I'm allowed." The officiant cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" What followed was nothing like their first wedding. No scripted vows that meant nothing. No obligation or debt or transaction. Instead, Damien spoke from his heart in a voice that shook slightly. 6 months ago, I thought I knew exactly what I was getting when I married you. A beautiful woman to parade at events, a hostage to good behavior from your father, a convenient solution to a business problem." He paused, swallowing hard. "I had no idea I was actually getting my soulmate, the person who would see every dark corner of who I am and choose to love me anyway. The woman who would stand beside me in the worst moments of my life and never flinch. The future mother of my child, and the only reason I'm standing here trying to be a better man." Tears streamed down Evelyn's face. "I promise to spend every day of the rest of our lives earning the choice you made today. To be worthy of your trust, to protect you and our daughter with everything I have, to become the man you deserve instead of the monster I was." His voice broke. "I love you, Evelyn. More than I thought I was capable of loving anyone, and I'll prove that to you every single day." Evelyn had to take a moment to compose herself before she could speak. "When I walked down the aisle the first time, I thought I was heading toward my execution. I thought you were going to be my prison, my punishment for my father's mistakes." She squeezed his hands. "But you became my salvation instead. You gave me freedom I'd never had. You respected me when you could have controlled me. You let me be angry and scared and broken, and you loved me through all of it without demanding I be anything other than exactly who I was. She took a shaky breath. I promise to be your partner in every sense of the word, to build this new life with you, to raise our daughter with all the love and stability we both wish we'd had, to remind you on your worst days that you're not the monster you think you are. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I love you, Damien, not despite who you were, not in spite of what you've done, but because of the man you're becoming, the man who chose love over fear, family over power, me and our daughter over everything else. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife for the second time. Damien kissed her like it was the first time and the last time and every moment in between, his hands cradling her face with devastating gentleness while their guests erupted in applause. When they finally broke apart, both crying and laughing and holding on to each other like anchors, the officiant cleared his throat again. I have one more surprise, Damien said. He gestured to someone in the audience. Margaret appeared, carrying a small velvet box. I know we decided not to do gifts, Damien continued, taking the box. But I found something I thought you should have. He opened it to reveal a locket on a delicate gold chain. Inside was a photograph Evelyn had never seen before. Her father, younger and healthy, holding her as a baby. Both of them smiling at the camera with genuine happiness. I had my people track down your family photo albums, Damien explained quietly. I thought you should have something to remember him the way he was before everything went wrong. Before the debts and the sickness and the choices that destroyed him. This is who he was when he loved you purely, before circumstances corrupted everything. Evelyn took the locket with shaking hands, staring at the photograph of a man she barely recognized. Her father before the cancer. Before the desperation. Before he'd sold her out for money. Just a man holding his daughter and looking happy about it. Thank you, she whispered. Damien fastened the locket around her neck. You get to choose which version of him to remember. The monster he became, or the father he was before that. I think you've earned the right to keep the good memories and let go of the rest. The reception was everything their first wedding wasn't. Real food instead of pretentious courses. Actual music people wanted to dance to. Speeches from friends who told embarrassing stories and made jokes that actually landed. Vincent gave a toast about how terrifying it had been watching Damien fall in love because the man became simultaneously more dangerous and more vulnerable. Margaret cried through her entire speech about watching Evelyn transform from a scared girl to a fierce woman. James, Evelyn's surviving bodyguard from the shooting, raised his glass and simply said, "To the toughest woman I know. May your enemies always underestimate you." As the sun set over Manhattan, Damien pulled Evelyn onto the dance floor for their first dance as a newly renewed couple. The song was slow and romantic, completely at odds with the violence and chaos that had brought them together. I have another confession, Evelyn said as they swayed together. Damien raised an eyebrow. Should I be worried? I'm in labor. He stopped moving. What? My water broke about an hour ago, during the ceremony. She smiled at his expression of absolute panic. I didn't want to ruin the wedding, so I figured I could make it through the reception before mentioning it. Evelyn, the contractions are still far apart. We have time. We're going to the hospital, right now. Damien was already pulling out his phone, barking orders at someone. Get the car, alert the hospital, clear the route. Damien, I'm fine. You are not fine. You're in labor. At our wedding. Why didn't you tell me immediately? Because you've been planning this day for months, and I didn't want... She stopped, gasping as a contraction hit harder than the previous ones. Damien caught her immediately, supporting her weight. That's it. We're leaving. The next few hours were a blur of controlled chaos. The drive to the hospital with Damien holding her hand so tightly, she worried he might break bones. Being admitted to a private suite that looked more like a hotel room than a hospital. Nurses and doctors speaking in calm voices while Evelyn's contractions intensified. Damien never left her side. He held her hand through every contraction, wiped her face with cool cloths, whispered encouragements and apologies and promises in her ear. When she screamed at him that this was all his fault, he agreed completely and apologized for his contribution. Labor lasted 14 hours. Just before dawn, while Manhattan woke up beyond the hospital windows, their daughter entered the world screaming at the top of her lungs. The nurse placed her on Evelyn's chest, tiny and perfect, and absolutely furious about being evicted from her comfortable home. Evelyn stared down at this impossibly small person and felt her heart crack open in ways she hadn't known were possible. "She's perfect," she whispered. Damien stood frozen beside the bed, staring at his daughter with an expression of complete wonder and terror. "You can touch her," Evelyn said softly. He reached out with shaking hands, one finger gently stroking their daughter's tiny fist. She immediately grabbed onto him with surprising strength, her crying quieting at the contact. Something in Damien's expression shattered. He dropped into the chair beside the bed and pressed his face against Evelyn's shoulder, his entire body shaking with sobs he couldn't control. "I'm a father," he managed between gasps. "I'm actually a father." "You're an amazing father already," Evelyn whispered, running her fingers through his hair while their daughter made small noises against her chest. "Look at her. She already knows you'll protect her from anything." They sat like that for a long time. Evelyn exhausted and exhilarated, Damien crying harder than she'd ever seen, their daughter slowly falling asleep against the sound of her mother's heartbeat. "What should we name her?" Damien asked finally, his voice rough. Evelyn had thought about this for months, considered family names and meaningful choices and everything in between. "Sophia," she said. "It means wisdom, and she's going to need a lot of that to navigate this crazy family we've built." "Sophia Moretti." Damien tested the name, then smiled. "Perfect." The nurse returned to take Sophia for measurements and tests, promising to bring her back shortly. Damien immediately started pacing the room like a caged animal, unable to settle while his daughter was out of sight. "She's fine," Evelyn said from the bed. "They're just checking her over." "I know, logically, I know that." He ran his hands through his hair. "But there's a part of my brain that's convinced something terrible is going to happen the second I'm not watching her." "Welcome to parenthood." That feeling never goes away. "Fantastic." The nurse brought Sophia back 15 minutes later, swaddled in hospital blankets and sleeping peacefully. Damien took her with exaggerated care, settling into the chair beside Evelyn's bed and staring at his daughter like she was a miracle he couldn't quite believe in. "She's so small," he whispered. "She'll get bigger." "What if I break her?" "You won't." "What if she hates me when she gets older? What if she finds out about everything I've done and decides I'm a monster?" Evelyn reached over to take his hand. "Then we tell her the truth, that you were a monster once, but you changed, that you gave up everything you'd built to give her a better life, that you loved her mother enough to become someone worthy of being her father." Damien's eyes were wet again. "And if that's not enough? Then we keep trying, keep being better, keep showing her through our actions that people can change, that mistakes don't define you forever, that love is stronger than fear." She squeezed his fingers. "We have time, Damien. Years and years to prove to her that she's loved and safe and cherished. Stop worrying about the future and just be here now, with us." He nodded slowly, turning his attention back to Sophia sleeping in his arms. Evelyn watched them together. This dangerous man who'd destroyed empires holding their tiny daughter like she was made of glass, and felt something settle in her chest. Peace. Actual, genuine peace for the first time since walking down that aisle 6 months ago. They'd survived. Both of them. Despite the violence and betrayal and losses that should have destroyed them, they'd made it through to the other side. And now they had this. A daughter. A future. A chance to build something beautiful from the ashes of everything they'd burned. 6 months later, Evelyn stood in the nursery watching Damien try to change a diaper while Sophia screamed her displeasure at the process. "I don't understand," he muttered, fumbling with the tabs. "The videos made this look easy. The videos lied. Everything about parenting is a lie designed to make people think they can handle it." Not helping Evelyn. She laughed and crossed to help him, showing him for the 100th time how to get the diaper on properly without creating gaps that would lead to disaster later. Sophia immediately stopped crying once she was comfortable again, staring up at her parents with dark eyes that looked disturbingly intelligent for a 6-month-old. "She's judging us," Damien said. "She's definitely judging us." They stood together looking down at their daughter, both exhausted from sleepless nights and constant feedings and the general chaos that came with having an infant. "I met with the lawyers yesterday," Damien said quietly. "We're officially clean. Every illegal operation shut down. Every questionable business sold or dissolved. Nothing left that could come back to haunt us. Evelyn looked up at him. How do you feel? Terrified, relieved, like I just walked away from the only identity I've known for 22 years. He paused. Free. Free is good. Free is strange. He reached down to pick up Sophia, cradling her against his chest with the ease of practice. But I'll take strange over dangerous. For her, for you, for us. Evelyn leaned against his side, watching Sophia yawn and settle into sleep against her father's shoulder. Did you ever imagine this? She asked. When you first proposed that marriage deal, did you ever think we'd end up here? Absolutely not. I thought you'd hate me forever, that we'd have a marriage on paper only, that you'd eventually leave the second your father's treatment was paid for. He pressed a kiss to Sophia's head. I never imagined falling in love. Never imagined wanting to change my entire life for someone. Never imagined being this happy existed outside of movies and fairy tales. We're definitely not a fairy tale. No, we're better. We're real. He turned to look at her, Sophia still sleeping against his shoulder. We're messy and complicated, and we've made terrible choices and survived impossible situations. But we're real, and we're ours. Evelyn stood on her toes to kiss him, careful not to wake the baby. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, both of you, more than I thought I was capable of loving anything. They stood in the nursery together while afternoon light painted everything in shades of gold. Sophia slept peacefully, completely unaware of the violence and chaos that had preceded her birth, or the empire her father had dismantled to give her a normal life. Outside, Manhattan continued its eternal rhythm, cars and people and lights that never stopped moving. But inside the penthouse, soon to be traded for a house in Connecticut with a yard and good schools, 3 people existed in their own small universe of second chances and hard-won peace. Damien Moretti had been a monster once, had built an empire on blood and fear and ruthless calculation, had ruled New York's underworld with absolute authority, and then he'd fallen in love with a woman half his age who'd walked down an aisle like she was heading toward her execution, and everything changed. He'd burned that empire to ashes, walked away from power and violence and everything he'd known, became someone new, someone better, not perfect, never perfect, but trying. Every single day trying to be worthy of the family he'd never thought he'd have. Evelyn had been terrified once, had thought marriage to a mafia boss would be her prison, had watched her father die and learned that everyone had a price, had become harder and colder and more capable of violence than she'd ever imagined. And then she'd chosen to love anyway, chosen to build instead of destroy, to heal instead of hurt, to give their daughter the stability and safety she'd never had. Not perfect, never perfect, but trying. Every single day, trying to be the mother she wished she'd had. Together, they were something neither of them had been alone. They were a family, broken and rebuilt, scarred but healing, learning how to be human again after becoming monsters. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Years later, when Sophia was old enough to ask questions about how her parents met, they told her a carefully edited version of the truth. About a young woman who married a stranger to save her father's life. About a man who fell in love despite himself. About choosing each other every day even when it was hard. They left out the violence, the blood, the empire built and destroyed. Those were stories for when she was older, if she ever needed to hear them at all. For now, she just needed to know she was loved, fiercely, completely, without reservation. And she was, every single day. By parents who'd walked through fire and come out the other side holding hands. By a father who read her bedtime stories in a voice that used to give orders that ended lives. By a mother who braided her hair with hands that had once held guns. They weren't perfect, but they were hers, and that was more than enough. The rain that had hammered against chapel windows on that first wedding day had given way to sunshine and clear skies. The fear had given way to love. The forced vows had given way to chosen promises. And Damien Moretti, 41 years old, reformed mafia boss, devoted husband, and completely terrified father, stood in his backyard watching his wife and daughter play in the grass and understood with perfect clarity that this was what winning actually looked like. Not power, not fear, not empires built on blood, just this, Just love and laughter and ordinary moments that somehow meant everything. He'd spent 22 years being a monster, and he'd spend the rest of his life being grateful that someone had loved him enough to help him become human again.